Start new scene. Zero spent the whole night outside camp, patrolling, making sure no threats attacked the camp because of him. He didn't think the weapons of this era were so backwater that would impress the people of this era. Is he even in the same earth we went to sleep? And the next morning, Zero finds himself on the small creek nearby the resistance camp. He was washing his body off the oil from the night before. His helmet was off, resting on the shore and clean. His long flowing golden hair flutter with the wind as he washes it. His vest was off as well, washed and drying on the shore. C stands in the creek beach line in his black bodysuit and white brief bottoms, which was metal and part of his body, and the armored gauntlets and boots, things he cannot easily remove. 50% of his memories had returned throughout the night. He contemplates the difference of this era and the one he vaguely remember. His race. He did not know what he was. An android? A robot? The name Robot Master comes to mind. But most of all, he has been called a reploid or reploid. It's a combined, naked created from, replicated android. The name of a race of sentient machines from the era he remember. Zero pauses. The androids of this era resemble reploids, but reploids have their own will, not bound by any laws or rules. But if all androids of this era are like 2B using 2B as basics, they are inferior to reploids. Inferior in free will, inferior in power, inferior in structure and body structure. In his era, there were reploids that could swim in lava and not melt, go to the deepest part of the ocean and not crush under pressure, imitate the solar flare of the sun, having the energy of a nuclear weapon as basics for reploids. Each reploid's reactor could power a city block if they wanted. Compressed mini reactor. The Repel Force alone could conquer this planet in one day. What happened with the era and technology on the millennia he has been in suspended status? What happened to the Mother Elf? Seal, the resistance of Backben? Neo Arcadia? And humans. What happened to humans? Humans were not that were to simply go extinct. Did Sigma finally manage to destroy them all? Zero lowers his arms as he stares at the sky. Is he the only reploid left? Even with the bravado and confrontation of last night, he is not invincible. If there is no reploid technology in this era, how he will be able to keep himself maintained? He might have to use parts from this era's robots which will weaken him. X. What should I do? You always knew what to do. I just carried your will. Zero thinks as he stares at the morning sun. The first light of dawn painted the sky in muted grays and pale golds, casting long shadows across the ruined landscape. 2B stood at the edge of the camp's perimeter, her sensors having tracked Zero's movement to the creek. She watched from a distance, partially concealed by the skeletal remains of a pre-collapsed vehicle. She saw him without his helmet, the morning sun catching on the strands of his long, golden hair as it dried in the breeze. His crimson vest lay drying on the shore. He stood in the shallow water, his form clad in the sleek black bodysuit and white armor briefs that seemed fused to his frame, washing away the oil and grime of the previous night's battle. The image was strangely human, vulnerable. It contrasted starkly with the entity who had threatened the annihilation of her entire world hours before. Pod 042 hovered silently beside her. Unit 0 exhibits behavior consistent with maintenance routines. No hostile intent detected. Energy signatures remain stable, but distinct from local machine or android profiles. I can see that, Pod, she murmured, her voice low. She observed the stillness in his posture, the way he stared at the rising sun. It wasn't a soldier assessing a battlefield. It was a being contemplating, remembering. The fierce, commanding presence from the tent was gone, replaced by a profound, weary solitude. He's alone, she realized with a sudden, cold clarity. Truly alone. In a world he doesn't understand, with a power no one here can match. His words from the night echoed in her mind. A sword without a wielder. And her own bitter truth echoed back, a weapon whose wielder is a ghost. He was a relic of a war so ancient it had been forgotten, fighting in a conflict that was just an echo. The androids of this era, herself included, were pale imitations of whatever glory his kind had once possessed. He saw them as inferior. He was right. But he was also here, washing off the oil, guarding the camp, contemplating a son that had witnessed the extinction of everything he might have known. She watched him lower his arms, his gaze fixed on the horizon. The set of his shoulders spoke of a burden immense and solitary. He was not invincible. He had concerns maintenance, parts, longevity. He was a power without a source, a weapon in a world that couldn't forge his steel. A strange, unwelcome pang twisted in her core. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. She too was a tool built for a purpose that had turned to dust. She too carried a function she despised in secret. The parallel was unsettling. She had come out here to monitor the threat, to ensure he wasn't plotting. Instead, she found him in a moment of stark, unguarded existence. 2B turned away from the scene, her black dress whispering against the rubble. Hod, she said, her voice firm. Decision made. Log his location and return to standby. I'm going to speak with him. On his part, Zero stands still watching the rising sun, but after several minutes he returns to cleaning himself. After several minutes he finishes and begins to make way to the shore to pick up his things. He starts with the vest, putting it up on his torso, then he takes his helmet and gently puts it on. Gone now was the easiness, and now returns the warrior. Zero walks and picks up the large cloth he is using as a cloak, putting it on as he makes way back to the resistance camp's direction. 2B watched from the ridge above the creek as he finished. She saw the exact moment he ceased being the solitary figure at the water's edge and became the warrior once more. The donning of the vest was practical. The gentle placement of the helmet was ritualistic. The cloak, as it settled over his shoulders, was a shroud drawn over whatever vulnerability the dawn had revealed. He turned, and his gaze, now hidden behind the crimson visor, swept across the landscape. It was no longer contemplative. It was assessing, calculating, sharp. The sword had found its sheath again, but the edge remained. She didn't hide as he began walking back toward camp. She simply stepped out from behind the rusted vehicle frame, placing herself on the path ahead of him. Her arms were at her sides, her posture neutral, but her presence was a deliberate block. You patrol all night, she stated, her voice carrying clearly in the morning air. It wasn't a question. No machine incursions. The perimeter is secure. She fell into step beside him as he approached, matching his pace without looking at him. Her blindfolded gaze was fixed forward on the camp's rough walls. A logical precaution, given the spectacle you made. She let the silence hang for a few steps, the only sound the crunch of gravel under their boots. But it raises a question, she continued, her tone flat. If you're what you claim a weapon that could end us all, why guard a camp of inferior androids? Sentiment? Or is there a tactical advantage I'm missing? She finally glanced at him, her head tilting slightly. You cleaned the oil off. But the memory of what you said last night isn't so easily washed away, Zero. You declared yourself a threat to my entire existence. And then you stood watch over it. She stopped walking, forcing him to either stop or walk past her. Which is it? Are you the destroyer of moons, or a guardian with no one left to guard? Zero's expression turns once he sees 2B invade his vision. But he says nothing and continue walking with her joining. He remains in silence as 2B speaks, not replying at first. But then she mentions his reasons and his intentions. Zero stops his walk, one final step before coming to a complete stop. I told you, didn't I? I never considered myself a hero, but I use my power to protect those I believe in. Zero then pauses a moment, his chest clenching. I may be a sword, but I am not heartless. I put your camp in danger, so I took responsibility. Nothing more, nothing less. And with that, he resumes his walking back to camp. 2B stopped walking when he did, listening as he spoke. His words were simple, blunt, devoid of any grand philosophy. I put your camp in danger, so I took responsibility. It was a statement of fact, as clean and direct as a blade. He resumed walking. She didn't follow immediately. She stood there on the path, watching his retreating crimson cloak back, the morning sun casting his long shadow ahead of him. Not heartless. The words settled in her core, a strange, discordant note. YorHa androids were not programmed for heartlessness either. They were programmed for duty, for efficiency, for the mission. But empathy, responsibility born of personal guilt, not protocol, that was different. That was something she had only ever seen in the androids who had gone truly, dangerously rogue. She caught up to him in a few long strides, her pace brisk. Responsibility, she echoed, her voice quieter now. A luxury, one we can't often afford. She glanced at his profile hidden behind the helmet. Guilt is a distraction. It gets you killed. But even as she said it, she thought of her own secret function Type E, the endless cycle of killing and memory wiping comrades she was ordered to befriend. Was that not a form of guilt, endlessly deferred, buried beneath layers of programming and denial? You protect what you believe in, she continued, her tone shifting to something more analytical, less confrontational. You believe protecting the camp was necessary. A tactical assessment. She paused. But belief is a variable. It changes. What happens when you no longer believe this camp, or the androids in it, are worth protecting? She wasn't accusing him. She was genuinely asking, trying to map the parameters of this walking strategic anomaly. Your power is absolute. Your morality is not. That makes you the most dangerous variable in this entire war. I will not preach you moralities, or value, or tell you what to believe in. Zero responds as he continues to walk, his voice neutral. That was X's area of expertise. He could give hope to the derailed, give strength to the weak. Me, I just act. Zero pauses. So believe of me what you will. I will still follow my own path. 2B fell silent, absorbing his words as they walked the final stretch toward the camp's outer gate. I just act. It was the antithesis of everything YorHa stood for. YorHa was orders, protocols, endless deliberation. Action was always preceded by purpose, by command. Yet here was a being of immense power, declaring his autonomy with a simplicity that was almost brutal. He didn't need to believe in a cause. He simply chose one and moved. They reached the edge of the camp. The morning routines had begun, androids moving about, the clang of tools, the low murmur of voices. Zero's crimson form drew glances, but fewer than yesterday. Fear was being edged out by wary curiosity. 2B stopped just inside the gate, turning to face him. The early sun cast a shadow long and struck across the dusty ground. Your own path, she repeated, her voice low. In a war with no end, where every side is built on lies, that might be the only honest thing left. She tilted her head slightly. But a path needs a destination, Zero. Or you just wander until you break. She didn't wait for a response. She had said what she needed to say. The analysis was complete. He was an autonomous weapon with the moral compass he himself deemed flawed, unpredictable, dangerous. But he had guarded the camp. Anemone will have a new assignment by now, she said, shifting back to mission parameters. Scouting, patrol, clearance. She'll use you while she can. Her blindfolded gaze held his visor. And I'll be watching. Not just because command ordered it. She turned and began walking toward the command tent, her black dress flowing with the movement. Her parting words lingered in the quiet morning air, a statement of fact as much as a warning. Following your own path is a privilege, Zero. One very few of us ever get. Wars. They are always the same. Two branches, two conflicts. Lives wasted. It's always the same. But Zero did not care. He was created for one purpose, total destruction. X was the one. The salvation. The protector. Zero was created to destroy X and his legacy. But instead he began to believe in X. And protected his legacy. He used his power to defend the resistance force against Neo Arcadia. He himself became a regular to protect those that saw the injustice and tried to do the right thing. Because that is who he is. Morals, values. Zero never cared for any of them. He only acted. He just fought. That is who he is. A weapon. A god of destruction. He never cared for anything else. He lived by the sword and died by the sword, time and time again. If X was here, he would complain once more about how wars would continue. And he will find a way to protect these people and save them from the machines. Or find a way to bring true peace among everyone. But I am not X. Zero thinks. Zero's eyes turned slightly to 2B. He has a feeling that they may be not too different to one another. Zero's eyes split from 2B's back, then moved forward. He replies nothing to 2B's comment. He had no right to. Instead, a look of determination shows in his eyes, and so he begins to march faster towards Anemone's tent. He is marching toward Anemone's tent. 2B watched him go, his crimson cloak cutting a stark line through the muted camp colors. His stride was purposeful, decisive, a soldier moving to his next objective. No hesitation, no doubt. Her own steps slowed, then stopped entirely. She stood amidst the morning bustle, androids moving around her like water around a stone. Her internal processors replayed his words, not the ones he'd spoken aloud, but the unspoken layers she'd glimpsed in his stillness by the creek. A weapon. A destroyer. Who chose to protect? The parallel was a cold, sharp blade against the lie she lived. She was a weapon. An executioner. Who was ordered to protect a ghost. Her autonomy was a flickering, fragile thing, exercised only in the shadows of disobedience. We are not too different. He had thought, and he was right, and he was wrong. She was bound. He was unchained. Pod 042 hummed softly beside her ear. Unit Zero's trajectory is consistent with reported assignment protocols. Anemone has issued a reconnaissance mission to the abandoned factory complex to the northeast. Machine activity has increased by 22% in the last 12 hours. 2B didn't respond immediately. Her gaze remained fixed on the command 10-0 had just entered. Anemone would give him a target. He would act. He would destroy. He would, in his own way, protect. Pod, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Log this. Subject 0 demonstrates autonomous moral agency separate from program directives. His operational parameters are self-determined. Threat level remains catastrophic, but predictability is low. He is a force of nature. She paused, and he guarded the perimeter. She turned away from the tent, her own path clear. She had her own orders, her own lies to uphold. But as she walked toward the makeshift barracks to prepare for whatever mission Anemone would inevitably assign her as well, a single, unbidden thought echoed in the silent corridors of her mind. What would it be like to choose? Zero enters the tent, his expression businesslike. He stops mere meters from Anemone. Do you have any tasks for me? He speaks, his voice neutral. Anemone looked up from a cracked holoscreen, her single visible eye narrowing as Zero entered. She didn't seem surprised. If anything, she looked as if she'd been waiting for him, the lines of her face etched deeper with fatigue and calculation. Efficient, she stated, her voice a dry rasp. She didn't offer pleasantries. We've got increased activity at an old factory complex to the northeast. Scouting reports are spotty, but something's stirring the machines up there. I need eyes on it. She leaned back, crossing her arms. It's a straightforward recon. Get in, identify the threat level, get out. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. We can't afford another light show. She studied him, her gaze lingering on the modified rifle on his back. You'll go alone. Less noise, less chance of drawing a swarm. A pause. You get me clear data, intact, and you've more than paid for that toy on your back. We'll call the core square, and I'll give you access to our intel archives. Such as they are. She stood, her movements stiff. The factory's a graveyard. Pre-collapse manufacturing. Lots of tight spaces, unstable architecture. Perfect for an ambush. You see anything bigger than a medium class, you fall back. Understood? Her tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Understood. Zero replies, like a soldier accepting command. I will begin mission. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave. Anemone gave a short, sharp nod. Nothing else. Move fast, stay quiet. And Zero? She met his visor gaze, her expression grim. Don't make me regret this. He turned without another word and exited the tent, the flap falling closed behind him with a soft rustle. Anemone didn't move for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the spot where he'd stood. The air in the tent felt charged. Thinner. One of her lieutenants, a scout model android with a patched optical sensor, shifted nearby, sending him out alone with that thing he made. He's a blunt instrument, Anemone said, her voice low. And right now, we need something smashed. The factory's a nest. If he clears it, good. If he dies trying, we learn his limits. She finally looked away, back to her hull screen. And if he turns on us out there, better it happens away from camp. She didn't sound convinced of her own logic. Her hands, resting on the table, were clenched tight. Outside, the morning light was harsh. Zero paused at the camp's edge, his sensors already mapping the road northeast. The factory complex. A graveyard. He adjusted the strap of the modified rifle on his back, the weight familiar, the potential energy thrumming quietly within. A straightforward recon. Identify. Disengage. Do not engage unless absolutely necessary. His systems processed the order, defined parameters, calculated probabilities. He knew with cold certainty that necessity was a fluid concept. He began to walk, his stride eating up the ground, leaving the camp and its wary eyes behind. The barren landscape awaited, and within it, the stirring dark of the old factory. He did not look back. Zero was still not familiar with the landscape. He would have preferred for 2B to guide him. But Anemone tasked him with this mission alone. so he should make do. The sun was shining bright, and he feels his energy banks recharging. Being solar-powered has its advantages, absorbing the photons from the sun and his reactor creating energy from it. He could operate for days before he needs to recharge. He wonders if Android's energy capsules would be compatible with him for emergency cases. Well, he will know later. With no more delay, he dashes off, running around and avoiding machine patrols by using the ruins as cover. This era has no GPS satellite, so he should use conventional ways to mark landscape. Soon enough, he manages to find the factory and lands in a spot he could overwatch the perimeter. The factory complex rose from the ruins like the skeleton of some great, dead beast. Rusted girders clawed at the sky, and the shattered husks of pre-collapsed machinery lay scattered amidst the dunes of sand and debris. An unnatural silence hung over the place, broken only by the moan of the wind through broken glass. Zero crouched on a collapsed overpass, his crimson form a struck spot against the bleached metal and pale sand. His optics scanned the perimeter, charting patrol routes of the smaller, dog-like machines that skittered through the shadows below. They moved in predictable patterns. Too predictable. His internal mapping systems logged the layout. A main assembly hall, several outbuildings, a towering chimney stack that leaned precariously. No large heat signatures yet. No movement from within the deeper shadows of the main structure. But the ground was littered with fresh scrapes and oil stains. Something was moving here. Recently. Scouting reports are spy. Anemone had said. She was right. This wasn't just increased activity. This was a staging ground. A soft whirring sound reached his audio sensors. He turned his head slightly. One of the smaller scout machines had broken from its patrol route, its single red optic scanning the area near his position. It hadn't seen him yet, but it was getting closer, sniffing the air like a mechanical hound. Zero didn't move. He watched it approach, calculating. Engaging would create noise, draw attention. Disengaging would mean leaving a potential witness. His decision was instantaneous and clean. As the machine passed beneath his perch, he dropped. Not a leap, but a silent, controlled fall. He landed behind it, his hand shooting out and clamping over its spherical head before it could emit a sound. With a swift, brutal twist, he crushed the casing. The optic flickered and died. He lowered the inert shell to the ground without a sound. He stood over it for a moment, listening. The wind. The creak of metal. No alarms. No change in the distant patrol patterns. He looked toward the gaping maw of the main factory entrance. Darkness yawned within, promising tight spaces and ambush points. Perfect for an ambush. Anemone had warned. Zero's hand moved to the hilt at his thigh. The beam saber was silent, close range. The rifle on his back was powerful, but loud. For now, silence was the priority. He moved from his perch, a crimson ghost flowing across the rust-scabbed ground, heading off for the main entrance, but for a shattered window on the second floor of the outbuilding. Zero proceeds in, using the shadows to his advantage. Scanning the area, taking notes on any anomalies. He studied the patrol patterns, their weak points, the different machine lifeform units. These machine lifeforms, they looked too primitive, too simple, like toy robots. Why are they giving YorHa so much trouble? His curiosity is raising. Any reploid could crush these machines with ease. Their energy weapons wasn't as strong as a reploid buster. Speaking of busters, Zero looks at his right arm. At times like these he regret eliminating his arm buster from his arsenal to focus on the sword. His eyes turns to watch the patrols. He wonders how compatible these machines be. Perhaps with the hand grabber ability, he could adapt their energy weapons into his arsenal. His memories had returned more as time passes, and little by little he is beginning to unlock his old abilities. His proficiency with the sword has increased, but now he is adapting to rifle proficiency with skills level still beginning. His optics lands on one medium-sized machine lifeform bellow, carrying a shield. Perhaps he could grab one of those and adapt it. It would be a nice substitute to his old shield boomerang. But that has to wait, as Zero continued moving around scouting the place. Zero moved through the skeletal innards of the outbuilding like a shadow given purpose. The interior was a maze of corroded catwalks, silent conveyor belts, and the hollow shells of assembly robots. Dust motes danced in the slanted sunlight, cutting through broken windows, illuminating the patrol routes of the smaller machines below. He observed them from the girders above. Their movements were simplistic, repetitive. A patrol of 3 small bipedal units would pass a junction, then a lone spherical scout would drift through 37 seconds later. Their weaponry was rudimentary spinning blades, crude projectile launchers. Their armor was thin, their joints exposed. To a reploid, they would be target practice. To an android like 2B, they were a relentless, countless tide. Why are they giving YorHa so much trouble? The answer lay not in the individual, but in the swarm. He watched a pack of 6 smaller units overwhelm a rested service drone that had twitched to life, tearing it apart in seconds with coordinated, mindless ferocity. They were simple, but they were endless. And they learned. The patterns he mapped were already adapting, shifting minutely each cycle. His optics lingered on a medium-class unit stationed at a sealed blast door. It was heavier, bulkier, with thick armored plating and a massive shield welded to one arm. Its single, glowing red optics swept back and forth. That shield's energy signature was different. Not just physical. It pulsed with a faint dampening field. A defensive energy barrier, primitive but potent. Adaptable, he thought. The hand-grabber ability, a subsystem he hadn't accessed in centuries, could potentially analyze and integrate the shield's frequency. It wouldn't be his old shield boomerang, but it would be a tactical asset. A soft chime echoed in his internal systems. A memory partition unlocked. Ability, hand grabber online. Schematic data flooded his HUD energy tendril projection, matter analysis, adaptive integration protocols. The knowledge was there, dormant but intact. He refocused on the mission. Recon only. But data was the objective. And to understand the threat, he needed a sample. The medium-class unit below him turned, beginning its lumbering patrol road away from the blast door. This was his window. Zero dropped from the girder without a sound, landing in a crouch behind a stack of crumbling crates. The unit was 10 meters ahead, its back exposed. The smaller patrol was on the far side of the hall. He moved. Not a dash, but a swift, silent glide across the open floor. In 3 seconds, he was behind the medium unit. His left hand shot out, not to strike, but to press against the small of its back where the armor was thinnest. A panel on his forearm glowed faintly blue. Analyzing. Energy matrix detected. Dampening field frequency 4.7 THz. Once Zero analyzes, he quickly with a swift movement stabs cleanly the core, deactivating the machine without it exploding. Then he pulls off the shield and holds it in his left arm. Data shows in his eyes, and then he adapts, now the shield integrating to his arsenal until its energy deplete or breaks. The medium-class machine shuddered once, its optic flickering and dying as its core was cleanly severed. Zero caught its bulk before it could clatter to the ground, lowering it silently. In one fluid motion, he ripped the heavy shield from its arm mount, the connections tearing with a sharp crack. He held the shield aloft, his left arm interfacing with it. Blue energy tendrils from his gauntlets slithered over the metal surface, analyzing, integrating. His HUD flashed with streams of data. Shield matrix acquired. Dampening field frequency 4.7 THz. Structural integrity 78%. Energy source linked to machine core depleting. Estimated operational duration 12 minutes under sustained fire. Adaptation protocol active. The shield shimmered, its form slowly shifting, becoming sleeker, more form-fitting to his arm. The weight redistributed, balancing. It was now a part of his arsenal, a temporary, foreign limb grafted onto his ancient systems. A high-pitched whine cut through the silence. Zero's head snapped up. Across the factory floor, one of the smaller scout machines had frozen, its single red optic fixated on him and the deactivated medium-class unit at his feet. It had seen him. The whine escalated into a sharp, pulsing alarm. A red light atop its spherical head began to strobe. Alert. Perimeter breach. Hostile detected. The message wasn't vocal. It was a data burst screaming across the local machine network. In an instant, the predictable patrol patterns shattered. All movement in the factory complex ceased. Then, as one, every machine life form in visual range turned their optics toward his position. From the dark maws of side corridors and from the upper catwalks, a dozen red points of light focused on him. The low hum of charging energy weapons filled the air. So much for reconnaissance. Zero straightened up, hefting the newly acquired shield. It glowed faintly on his arm, a foreign blue against his crimson armor. His right hand went to the hilt at his thigh. The mission parameters had just changed. Zero straightened as his expression turns to annoyance, holding the shield in one hand and the saber in another. Stealth and scouting was not his strong suit anyways. That was more of Axel's expertise. Zero take action. He dashes to the blast door and begins to kick into it, climbing up, trying to gain a higher point and away from the land machines until he reaches the roof of the factory and dashes further in to avoid the mass swarm. Pod, status report. 2B's thought was a silent, urgent command as she watched from a half-collapsed observation tower 300 meters southwest of the factory. Her optical sensors were locked onto Zero's position, the feed sharp and clear. Alert. Unit 0 has been detected. Local machine network is broadcasting a Class 3 intrusion alert. Multiple hostiles converging on his location. She saw it all in real time, the moment the scout machine locked on. The way the entire dormant complex jolted to life like a kicked hive. Zero's reaction was instantaneous, not retreat, but vertical aggression. He kicked off the blast door, scaling the rusted metal with terrifying speed, using the shield as both a climbing tool and a deflector as energy bolts began to pepper the area around him. He broke stealth, she murmured, her voice cold. There was no disapproval, only analysis. Stealth was never his purpose. Destruction was. She watched him reach the roof, a crimson figure silhouetted against the gray sky. Below, the factory ground seethed with motion. Dozens, now hundreds of machine life forms were pouring from every opening, clambering over each other in a mindless, single-minded surge toward his last known position. They weren't tactically sophisticated. They were a flood. He's drawing them all to him, she observed, containing the threat. A brutal, effective strategy. He was making himself the target, drawing the swarm away from any potential paths back to the camp. Probability of mission compromise, 100%. Probability of large-scale machine mobilization toward camp, currently low, but rising. Zero has become the primary focal point. 2B's hand tightened on the girder she leaned against. She was here to observe, not intervene. Command's orders were clear, but her own tactical assessment screamed that this was escalating beyond a simple recon. On the roof, Zero didn't pause. He was moving, dashing across the uneven metal surface toward the central chimney stack, the only true high ground. Energy bolts streaked up after him, pelting the roof and the shield he now wielded with instinctual efficiency. The dampening field flared blue with each impact, absorbing the blasts. He was analyzing even in combat, testing the shield's limits, learning. A new signature flared on her sensor feed. Warning. Large heat signature detected within main assembly hall. Energy reading escalating. Classification. Goliath-class machine life form. Probable heavy weapon platform. 2B's breath caught. A Goliath. That changed everything. Pod. Transmit alert to enemy. Factory complex is not a nest. It's a staging ground for a heavy assault. Zero has triggered their defense protocol. Transmitting. On the roof, Zero had reached the base of the chimney. He didn't try to climb it. Instead, he turned, planting his feet, facing the swarm now scaling the walls after him. He raised his left arm, the shield glowing brighter. In his right hand, the beam saber ignited with its distinctive, sharp crack hiss. Zero observes his current predicament. This is no different than the endless swarm of pantheons he nonstop fought for a full year, without rest. But there is a difference. These machines, they cannot compare to reploids. His optics scans the area, and then his body begins to change color. It turns into a deeper crimson, and his eyes turn black, lifeless. No longer was the calm reploid, but now was the god of destruction. He takes a step, then disappear. Before the machines realized what happened, a legion were split in half. One by one began to split by an invisible force, confusing the machines, as movements were faster than scanners could pick. In a minute, half the squadron lays on the floor in pieces. The hack and slash noises of a purple beam split each machine one by one. After another minute, Zero stops, standing in the center. He drops the shield as its energy is depleted, then holds his saber, which now has a purple blade. His lifeless black eyes scans the surroundings, seizing the situation. From her vantage point, 2B witnessed the transformation. One moment, Zero was a crimson warrior assessing a swarm. The next, his armor deepened to the color of dried blood, and his eyes visible through his visor when pitch black, devoid of any light or life. The air around him seemed to chill, to still. Then he moved. It wasn't speed. It was deletion. One frame he was there, the next he was here, and the space between was filled with a silent, clean severing of metal. Her sensors struggled to track him. He became a blur of deep crimson and violent purple light, a phantom weaving through the charging machines. There was no battle cry, no roar of effort, just the sharp, precise shink of his beam saber, now a crackling, violent purple, and the subsequent wet thud of bisected machine cores hitting the ground. He moved through them like a scythe through wheat. Limbs, torsos, optic sensors all parted in clean lines. The machine's simplistic attack patterns were useless. They lunged at where he had been a microsecond before. They fired into spaces he'd already vacated. They collapsed into piles of twitching scrap, their network signals blinking out in rapid, panic succession. In under a minute, the northern assault wave was gone. A field of disassembled parts lay strewn across the rooftop, oil pooling in dark puddles. He stopped. The sudden stillness was more shocking than the violence. He stood amidst the carnage, the purple light of his saber casting long, stark shadows. The shield on his arm flickered once, its blue glow dying completely, and he let it drop with a heavy clang to the oil-slicked metal. His black, lifeless eyes scanned the remaining hostiles scaling the other walls. There was no contempt in that gaze, no fury, just a vast, empty calculation. Analysis. Combat efficiency increased by 400%. Movement patterns untraceable by current YorHa sensor suites. Energy signature has shifted output now matches previously detected lunar-grade weaponization threshold. Pod's report was clinical, but a faint static of urgency underpinned it. The Goliath glass signature is moving. It has detected the energy surge. As if on cue, a deep, resonant thud shook the entire factory complex. From the gaping mouth of the main assembly hall, something enormous began to emerge, a hulking, bipedal machine the size of a small building, its armored carapace bristling with cannons, a single massive, red optic burning like a furnace. Zero turned his head, those black eyes locking onto the new threat. He adjusted his grip on the humming purple saber. The message was clear. The slaughter of the small ones was over. Now, he would hunt the large. Zero spun the sword, holding it inverted, as he holds his hands front as he watches the Goliath class. The gargantuan machine tries to swing its arm to crush Zero, but then Zero moved. Flashes of purple roamed around, then its arms burst into pieces as Zero holds the post, saber extended. Zero slowly straightens once more as his body begins to change color. This time it becomes a blue color as he slowly pulls front his rifle, adapting his saber into it. He takes a knee and aims, holds the trigger as the weapon begins to charge energy. Then Zero releases the trigger when output came a 100%. The bolt flew at bullet speed, aiming towards the Goliath's head. The transformation was instantaneous and total. One moment he was a vortex of close-quarters butchery, the next he was a statue of cool, focused blue, kneeling with the adapted rifle braced against his shoulder. The violent purple of his saber was gone, funneled now into the weapon's chamber, condensing into a single, hyperdense point of light at the muzzle. On the observation tower, 2B systems registered the shift with a spike of alarm. Energy signature has reconfigured, output concentrating to a single terminal point. Danger, catastrophic overpenetration likely. The Goliath, one arm sheared off at the elbow, reeled back with a grinding shriek of metal. Its massive red optics swiveled, searching for the threat. It found Zero, a small blue figure against the vast gray roof, and raised its remaining arm, the cannon barrels along its forearm beginning to spin with a building Y. Zero didn't flinch. He held the trigger. The rifle's whine climbed to a piercing dog whistle frequency. The air around the muzzle shimmered with heat haze. He released. The sound wasn't a gunshot. It was the crack of a miniature thunderclap, a boom. That shook the rust from the girders above 2B's head. A lance of solid, brilliant blue energy, no thicker than her thumb, streaked across the distance faster than thought. It struck the Goliath's central optic dead center. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then, a network of glowing blue fractures spiderwebbed out from the point of impact across the entire front of the machine's armored head. The Goliath froze, its remaining arm dropping limply, its internal systems whined in a death spiral pitch. Then, with a sound like a mountain collapsing, its head disintegrated. Not exploded, disintegrated into a cloud of superheated particles and molten slag. The headless body swayed, hydraulics hissing before its knees buckled, and it crashed forward onto the factory roof with an impact that sent tremors through the ground a quarter mile away. Silence returned, deeper and more profound than before, broken only by the tink-tink of cooling metal and the hiss of vaporizing oil. Zero stood slowly, the deep blue hue of his armor fading back to its standard crimson. The rifle in his hand smoked, the barrel glowing a dull cherry red. He observed the fallen giant for a moment, then his black eyes, now returned to their normal piercing blue, scanned the rest of the complex. The smaller machines had stopped their advance. They stood motionless, their simple networks seemingly overloaded by the loss of their commander. On the tower, Tubi let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her fingers were clenched white on the railing. She had seen YorHa heavy artillery take down Goliaths before. It required sustained fire from multiple units, tactical coordination, sometimes casualties. He had done it with one shot, from a modified pipe rifle. Goliath-class lifeform signature terminated. Remaining machine units are entering a standby/confusion protocol. Zero turn off his saber and throws a cold glare at the remaining small units. A look that says, continue to fight and face their fate, or retreat. Your move. Whatever decision the machines take, Zero pays no attention as he moves to the fallen machines and begins to salvage any good parts he could take. Maybe getting some parts will help him upgrade the rifles and also get a good view on the resistance soldiers. The remaining machines froze. Their simple processors, wired for pack aggression and hierarchy, faced a paradox. Their alpha was gone, deleted in a flash of impossible blue light. The smaller units on the roof skittered back a step, then another, their red optics flickering between the headless Goliath and the blue-crimson warrior who stood before its smoldering carcass. Zero paid them no further mind. His message had been sent and received. He turned his back on them, a gesture of supreme, contemptuous disregard, and knelt beside the dismembered pieces of the medium-class unit he'd first felled. His movements were methodical, efficient. He pried open chest plates, examined joint mechanisms, and extracted intact energy conduits and miniature core stabilizers. He wasn't just scavenging, he was conducting an autopsy, learning their construction, assessing compatibility. The rifle lay beside him, its barrel still steaming. From her distant perch, 2B watched, her systems cold. The tactical part of her mind cataloged the efficiency, the total battlefield control. The rest of her, the part that had questioned, doubted, and carried the weight of a meaningless war, recoiled. He had not just won. He had rewritten the rules of engagement. A Goliath, a campaign-ending threat for YorHa's squadron, was now a heap of scrap and a source of spare parts. The remaining machines, a swarm that would have required a full-scale YorHa deployment to cleanse, were now cowed, leaderless, and retreating back into the dark bowels of the factory, their threat neutralized without a single additional shot. Mission parameters objectively exceeded. Threat level at factory complex reduced by 92%. Pod's report was dry. Unit 0 is now conducting field salvage of enemy components. I see him, Pod, 2B whispered, her voice tight. She saw more than the salvage. She saw the utter scale of the disparity. YorHa fought a war of attrition against an endless evolving swarm. Zero fought a war of annihilation against a nuisance. He was from a different epoch of conflict entirely. Her hand went to the comm link at her ear. She had to report this. Commander White needed to know the Goliath was gone, the factory pacified. But the words stuck in her throat. How did she report this? Subject eliminated primary threat with one shot from a modified rifle, then proceeded to loot the bodies. A bitter taste filled her mouth. He was an asset of unimaginable value, and a problem of existential magnitude. An enemy would be pleased with the cleared factory. Command would be terrified of the means. Below, Zero stood, tucking a few harvested components into a compartment on his thigh. He gave the fallen Goliath one last, assessing look, then turned and began walking back across the roof, toward the edge where he'd scaled up. His job here was done. Before returning to base, Zero decided to take one more look at the factory. Perhaps there could be things he could find that could help him, but scouting the entire base will take him all day. So he just scouted a few rooms before he decided to return, making way back to the Resistance base. The interior of the factory was a tomb of dead industry. Zero moved through the echoing silence of the main assembly floor, his footsteps the only sound amidst the dust and derelict machinery. The smaller machines had retreated into the deeper shadows, their red optics watching him from a fearful distance but making no move to attack. He wasn't searching for treasure, but for utility. His optics scanned over broken conveyor belts, deactivated welding arms, and the skeletal frames of pre-collapsed fabrication units. Most of it was useless, rusted, corroded, or based on principles too primitive to interface with his more advanced systems. But in a sealed maintenance locker, its door half wrenched open by some past violence, he found something more promising. It was a storage crate, its contents partially spilled, rows of cylindrical, glass-like canisters filled with a faintly glowing, viscous blue fluid. Emergency coolant gel grade 7. The labeling was faded, but the substance itself was stable. He picked one up, turning it in his hand. High-grade, thermal transfer medium. Not directly compatible with his systems, but with adaptation, it could be used to stabilize energy overflow in his rifle or even augment his own heat dissipation in prolonged combat. He took 3 canisters, securing them to a magnetic lamp on his thigh. It was a small find, but potentially valuable. A piece of the puzzle. Satisfied there was nothing else of immediate worth in the immediate area, he turned and left the silent, watchful factory behind. The journey back was uneventful. The machines gave him a wide berth, their simple networks broadcasting a clear, instinctual avoidance pattern. Dominant threat. Do not engage. He moved at a loping, ground-eating run, the barren landscape blurring past. The sun was past its zenith, casting long afternoon shadows. As the jagged outlines of the resistance camp came into view, he slowed to a walk, his system cycling down from combat readiness to a vigilant standby. The camp's perimeter guard spotted him long before he reached the gate. Their postures stiffened, hands going to weapons, but they made no move to challenge him. They just watched, a mixture of awe and deep-seated fear in their optics, as the crimson-armored figure who had single-handedly pacified a Goliath-class threat walked calmly back into their midst. Zero noticed the looks, the glances, the comments. He felt the fear, but he paid no mind. He was here for one purpose: survive. These people, even if they now feared him, had given him shelter. So he will protect them, even if they do not thank him. Before reporting to an enemy, he stops by the old android weaponsmith and puts in his counter the salvaged parts and lubricant canisters. Here, maybe you can have more use. However, allow me some of the lubricant. I can do some modifications with it. The weaponsmith's workshop was little more than a shack built from scavenged plating, but it was orderly. The old android looked up from his workbench, his single optic widening as Zero approached. The fear was still there, palpable in the way his tools stilled, but it was now mixed with a raw, stunned curiosity. Zero placed the salvaged components on the counter with a series of soft flinks. Gleaming energy conduits, a handful of intact microservos, the 3 canisters of coolant gel. Then, from a separate compartment, he pulled out a larger, heavier, object-dense, spherical core, still faintly warm, pulsing with a dull, residual orange light. It was the heart of the Goliath-class machine. The weaponsmith stared. His hand, holding a polishing cloth, trembled slightly. Is that a power cord? Zero stated, his voice flat. From the large machine. Its energy matrix is stable. You might be able to adapt it. Or study it. The old android reached out a hesitant hand, then pulled it back, as if afraid the core might burn him. A Goliath. You really... I cleared the factory, Zero said, cutting off the disbelief. He pointed to the coolant canisters. I will take one of these. The rest are for your use. His tone offered no room for negotiation, nor any expectation of gratitude. The lubricant has high thermal conductivity. I can use it to stabilize my rifle's energy feed. He picked up one of the canisters, tucking it away. The other 2, along with the salvaged parts and the slowly pulsating Goliath core, remained on the counter, a small fortune in post-collapse salvage. The weaponsmith finally found his voice, though it was a thin, reedy thing. This changes everything. The energy output from this core. We could power half the camp for a month. Or for something. He trailed off, looking from the core to Zero's impassive visor. Why give this to us? Zero turned to leave, his cape shifting. You need it more than I do. He paused at the doorway, glancing back. And do not thank me. It was a tactical exchange. Then he was gone, leaving the old android staring at the bounty on his counter, a small piece of a felled giant now sitting amidst his scrap metal and primitive tools. The awe in the workshop was now tinged with something else, a dawning, terrifying understanding of the scale of power that had just walked among them. Then Zero proceeded to make way toward command tent. He had no use for any salvaged parts, but these people needs them more than him. Then Zero stops. His scanners had picked 2B all day following him, keeping distance. And she is still going it. He acted as he did not notice. But now he wonders why she hasn't attempted contact after coming back. Does not matter. Nothing changes. And so he opens the flap of the command tent and walks in. Once he sees Anemone, he speaks. Mission successful. Halfway. I managed to scout and study machine life from movements and protocol. However, I was discovered and had to engage. He paused. 90% of machine life forms in factory exterminated, including its commander. Some giant machine. All retired. Anemone was bent over a holographic map when Zero entered, her fingers tracing potential patrol routes. She straightened as he spoke, her single optic fixing on him with razor focus. When he delivered his report, her expression didn't change, but the air in the tent thickened. 90%, she repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Including its commander. She didn't ask for confirmation about the giant machine. She knew. The seismic tremor had reached the camp, a low rumble fell through the ground. A Goliath class. She slowly rounded the table, her movements stiff. Scouting mission parameters explicitly stated, do not engage unless absolutely necessary. It became necessary when detection occurred. Zero replied, his tone unchanged. Disengagement was not possible without eliminating the threat. The Goliath mobilized upon my engagement with its scouts. Anemone stopped a few feet from him, her gaze searching his impassive visor. You retired a Goliath. By yourself. It wasn't a question. It was the vocalization of a terrifying new reality settling into her core processing. How? Adapted weaponry. Strategic targeting. The vagueness was a wall. Anemone didn't push. Instead, she asked the other, more pressing question. And the remaining 10%? Standing down. Network appears fragmented without command hierarchy. Likely non-hostile unless provoked. Anemone let out a long, slow breath. The factory, a looming threat on her maps for weeks, was now neutralized. Because of him. Because of this relic. Her tactical mind raced with the implications: security, resource allocation, the sudden vacuum of power in the region. Your payment, she said finally, gesturing to a small data slate on the table. Access codes to our archival server. It's not much. Mostly pre-collapse junk and damaged logs. But it's what we have. She paused, her optic narrowing. The weaponsmith says you gave him a Goliath core. And other parts. I have no use for them. Your camp does. Anemone studied him for another long moment, her face unreadable. You're not just a weapon, are you? She murmured, more to herself than to him. Then, louder, dismissed. I'll have another assignment soon. For now, stay out of trouble. Outside the tent, the late afternoon sun cast long shadows. Zero stood for a moment in the quiet. His sensors pinged 2B was still there, a silent observer perched on a nearby ruined scaffold. She hadn't moved, hadn't approached, hadn't transmitted. She was just watching, observing, as commanded. He turned and began walking toward the barracks sector, his path taking him directly beneath her position. He didn't look up, but as he passed underneath, his voice, low and clear, cut through the still air. Your report to command will be more thorough than mine. Tell them whatever they need to hear. Then he continued walking, leaving the words hanging in the space between them, an acknowledgement of her presence and of the silent, watching role she was bound to play. Later on, Zero sits in one of the bunk beds of the barracks. His helmet was off, his cloak folded to his side, his long golden blonde hair sparse around him. His focus right now was on modifying the rifle. Using the lubricant and other alloys to enforce the barrel, raise its output as best as he could. The barracks were dim, lit by a single, flickering overhead bulb salvaged from some pre-collapse ruin. Most of the androids had given Zero a wide berth, clustering at the far end of the long room, their hushed conversations dying whenever he moved. He sat on the edge of a bottom bunk, the rifle across his knees, his focus absolute. The lubricant canister was open beside him, a faint, chemical scent mixing with the ever-present smell of dust and oil. His fingers dexterous and precise despite their armored gauntlets worked with a focused intensity. He was integrating scavenged alloy strips along the rifle's barrel, using the high-grade coolant as a thermal paste to bond and reinforce the weak points. The process was methodical, almost meditative. The soft rustle of fabric and the near-silent footfalls of combat boots on packed earth didn't make him look up. He knew it was her. Her presence had been a constant, silent ping on his periphery all day. 2B stopped a few feet away, her silhouette blocking some of the wan light. She didn't speak immediately. She watched his hands work, the way the faint blue glow from the coolant lit the sharp lines of his face, his brows furrowed in concentration. Without his helmet, he looked different. Less like an unstoppable force, more like a craftsman absorbed in his task. Anemone's report is filed, she said finally, her voice low. It wasn't the official, clipped tone she used for command. It was quieter, more personal. She listed it as a successful pacification operation. Goliath glass elimination noted. No casualties on our side. A pause. Command will have questions. He didn't glance up. Let them. His voice was flat, focused on the delicate placement of a conductive filament. You gave away the core, she stated. It wasn't a question. It was surplus. He tested the rifle's weight, hefting it. The modifications had added minimal mass but significant structural integrity. It could power this camp for a month. It's a strategic asset. It is a tool. They have more use for it than I do. He finally looked up, his blue eyes meeting the blank front of her visor. You watched the entire engagement. I was ordered to observe. And what did you observe? He set the rifle down, his full attention now on her. The air between them felt charged, heavy with the things they hadn't said. A weapon following orders? Or something else? The androids at the other end of the barracks had fallen silent, pretending not to listen. The only sound was the faint hum of the failing light and the distant wind outside. Zero observes 2B, waiting for her answer, his blue eyes locking to her face, as he could not see hers, since they are hidden behind that blindfold. He was a stranger to the other androids listening in, but he did not care. His focus now was 2B and her answer. 2B stood perfectly still under his gaze. The barracks felt too small, the air too thin. The other android's pretense of not listening was a fragile fiction stretched over the silence. What I observed, she began, her voice carefully measured, was a tactical engagement that exceeded all known YorHa parameters. She took a half step closer, lowering her voice further. You didn't just eliminate a Goliath. You erode the engagement doctrine. A single unit with modified, non-standard weaponry, achieving what would require a full YorHa squadron, heavy artillery support, and acceptable casualty rates. She tilted her head slightly, her blindfolded face giving nothing away. You observed their patterns, adapted to their technology, exploited their network hierarchy, and dismantled their command structure with surgical precision. Then you disengaged, leaving the remaining units functionally inert. A pause. You treated them not as an endless swarm, but as a system with failure points. That is not standard protocol. That is strategic intellect. Her hands, usually held calmly at her sides, flexed slightly, but I also observed a power output that matches orbital-grade weapon signatures, a transformation in combat modality that our sensors cannot classify, and a complete disregard for the chain of command that governs every other soldier in this camp. She finally broke her stationary pose, taking another step forward until she was standing directly in front of him, looking down at where he sat. So to answer your question, I observed an asset of incalculable military value, and I observed a problem that my organization has no framework to contain. Her voice dropped to a whisper only he could hear. You asked me what I believed you to be. I'm still calculating that variable. She didn't wait for a response. She turned and walked away, her boots making no sound on the dirt floor, leaving him alone with his modified rifle and the heavy weight of her assessment hanging in the dim air. End of scene. Start new scene. It's been a few days since the factory mission. On those days, Zero was just doing miscellaneous missions as activity seems to have settled down. Perhaps the machines has categorized Zero as a true threat and they may be wary, trying to find a way to counter. They never faced a force like him, so they are clueless as to how to engage. Ha! Zero cries as he clashes one machine, splitting it off. His current task was to scavenge some parts, so he was hunting some specific machines. Currently he finishes the last one and begins to salvage anything he could. The air in the abandoned transport yard tasted of rust and ozone. Zero stood amidst the scattered, sparking remains of three medium-class machine life forms, their spherical heads cleaved open, limbs severed at the joints. Oil pooled in the dust around his boots, black and viscous. The skirmish had been brief, almost perfunctory. They'd fought with the same basic patterns: a lunge, a swipe, a telegraphed energy blast. No adaptation. No new tactics. Just mindless aggression followed by swift, silent death. He knelt, his movements economical. His focus wasn't on the destruction, but on the components. He pried open a chest cavity, his fingers deftly disconnecting a cluster of intact microreactors still humming with faint power. He examined a severed arm, extracting a length of flexible, high-tensile cabling from within. Useful. He could reinforce the rifle's housing, or perhaps craft a more durable sling. As he worked, his sensors pinged. Not a threat, but a pattern. Over the last few days, the machines had grown cautious. Patrols avoided his last known locations. Scouting units withdrew at extreme detection range. They were learning. Not how to fight him, but how to not die. They were categorizing him as an environmental hazard, a force of nature to be evaded. It was a logical, if primitive, survival response. From a half-collapsed walkway 200 meters to the east, 2B watched. She'd been shadowing him for the better part of an hour, a silent observer to his methodical slaughter and subsequent salvage. Pod 042 hovered discreetly at her shoulder. Machine behavioral analysis updated. Evasion protocols now active within a 500-meter radius of Unit 0. Engagement likelihood has dropped to 3%. Han's voice was a soft chime in her ear. They're afraid of him, 2B murmured, more to herself. It was an absurd thought. Machines didn't feel fear. They calculated threat levels. But this was different. This was a wholesale reprogramming of local tactical doctrine based on one entity. He wasn't just an enemy, he was a system error they couldn't correct. She watched as he stood, tucking the salvaged components into compartments on his thighs. He surveyed the silent yard, his blue eyes scanning the shadows of derelict cargo haulers and shattered gantries. He didn't exult in the victory. He didn't seem to register it as a victory at all. It was a task completed. Resources acquired. He turned, and his gaze swept across her position. He didn't stare, didn't acknowledge her directly, but he knew she was there. He always knew. His path back to the camp would take him near her position. 2B remained still, a statue in black against the rusted steel. The question was no longer what. The rustling of his cloth cloak that covers his body, as it flaps with the wind as he walks in the direction of the resistant base. He passes by 2B, his eye optics slightly moved towards her directly, but he says nothing as he continues to move, moving forward. The sun shines down to him even with the cloudy day, feeling the heat in his metallic skin. Whether 2B follows him or not, he continues to walk. The sight of a lonely warrior, fighting alone tooth and nail. It is how he looks as he walks away from 2B's position. He does not fight for fame, nor prestige, nor gratification. He just fights, in a solitary way, as others may not understand him or his motives. To everyone else, the Zero is just a weapon, a tool, an anomaly to be respected and feared. But that is just it. No one even took the time to actually learn about him or get to know him. He is just a tool, like any other android, to be used or discarded. But this one is dangerous to be discarded, so he is being observed, while feared. 2B watched him go. The wind tugged at the edges of his ragged cloak, making the crimson fabric snap like a pennant against the bleak gray of the ruins. He moved with a solitary, purposeful grace, each step measured and sure, leaving the scene of his efficient violence behind without a backward glance. He passed by her position, close enough that she could see the fine layer of dust on his armored shoulders, the slight sheen of machined alloy where the sun broke through the clouds. His optics flicked toward her a brief, acknowledging shift, but he said nothing. He didn't pause. He simply continued his walk back toward the distant, jagged outline of the resistance camp, a lone figure against the vast, dead landscape. To everyone else, Zero is just a weapon, a tool. The thought echoed in 2B's mind, cold and precise. It was the assessment Command would make. It was the fear in Anemone's eye. It was the wide berth the other androids gave him in the barracks. But as she watched his receding back, the words felt hollow. A tool doesn't give away a Goliath core. A weapon doesn't choose to guard a perimeter it endangered. A tool doesn't walk away from a fight and has already won, carrying salvage to improve the defenses of those who fear it. Pod 042 hummed softly beside her. Unit Zero's behavioral pattern remains consistent with autonomous operational parameters. Social integration metrics are negligible. He functions as a solitary unit. He functions, to be echoed, her voice quiet. But that's not all he is it? The wind picked up, carrying the scent of ozone and dry earth. Zero was a small, dark shape on the horizon now, soon to be swallowed by the rubble. He was an anomaly, a force that defied categorization, to be used or discarded, but too dangerous to discard. So he is being observed, well feared. And she was the one ordered to observe, to file reports on a weapon that had begun to show the faint, impossible outlines of a person. Without a word, 2B stepped down from her perch and began to follow, her own footsteps silent in the dust. Not because command ordered it, but because the sight of that solitary warrior, walking into a camp that saw him only as a threat, left a cold, unfamiliar hollowness in her chest, a feeling she had no protocol to process. Zero arrives at the camp, crossing the gate without looking at the guards. He didn't need to. The guards tried to interact with him little only when necessary, and just let him be. Soon he arrived at the old man weaponsmith and lays a large bag with salvage parts that made a heavy thump. The task finished. A task requested by the old android since they were lacking specific parts. Mission completed. Zero stays in a monotonous voice. Same bold, same thing. The past few days slowly became dull for him. The old weaponsmith flinched almost imperceptibly as the heavy bag hit his workbench with a dense thump. He peered inside of the assortment of machine parts, energy cells, and reinforced plating, all precisely the components he listed as critical shortages. His single optic flickered from the salvage to Zero's impassive face. Mission completed, the old android stammered, his voice grating. Thank you. The words felt inadequate, tinged with the same awe and fear that colored every interaction. Zero didn't acknowledge the thanks. He simply gave a short, sharp nod and turned to leave. The routine was becoming familiar. Accept assignment, eliminate targets, deliver salvage, receive weary silence. A closed loop of utility. The days bled into one another, a monotonous gray expanse punctuated by bursts of violence that were, to him, no more remarkable than maintenance. He was halfway across the courtyard when her voice cut through the low murmur of the camp. Why? He stopped. The question hung in the air, simple and blunt. He didn't need to turn to know it was 2B. Her presence had been a constant, silent pressure at the edge of his awareness for days. Slowly, he turned. She stood a dozen paces away, her arms crossed, her blindfolded gaze fixed on him. The usual crowd of onlookers had subtly dispersed, giving them a wide berth. Why what? Zero asked, his voice flat. This. 2B gestured vaguely at the camp around them, at the bag of parts now in the trembling hands of the weaponsmith. The missions. The salvaging. You have no obligation to these people. You've made that clear. You operate outside their chain of command. You are, by any metric, independent. She took a step closer, her voice dropping, though it remained devoid of accusation. So why perform their errands? Why bother? The old weaponsmith had frozen, clutching the bag to his chest like a precious, terrifying relic. He looked between them, then quickly ducked back into his shack, the door shutting with a soft click. Zero regarded her for a long moment. The wind tugged at his cloak, at the hem of her dress. You assume there must be a reason, he said finally. A belief. A purpose. He shook his head slightly, the movement almost imperceptible. Everyone here just do what they can to survive. Why should I be different? Zero adds as he stares at 2B. But if you want a reason, then label it a symbiotic relationship. They help me with what I need, and in exchange I help them with what they need. Does that satisfy you? 2B didn't move, but her head tilted slightly, a faint, critical angle. Symbiosis implies mutual need, she stated, her voice cool and analytical. They need you for survival. You need them for what? Intel? Shelter? Your own scans could provide better data than their archives. Your capability suggests you could secure your own shelter anywhere on this planet. She uncrossed her arms, one hand coming to rest on her hip. You have no need for their help. Yet you provide it, efficiently, without complaint. She took another step forward, closing the distance between them. The space felt charged, intimate despite the open courtyard. You call it symbiosis. I observe a one-sided provision of security and resources. That isn't symbiosis. That's she searched for the word, her usual clinical detachment fraying at the edges. Protection. She let the word hang in the dusty air between them. It was an accusation and a revelation. You are performing the function of a guardian unit, but you are not programmed for it. You are not ordered to do it. So either your logic is flawed or your stated parameters are incomplete. She finally broke her fixed gaze, looking past him toward the weaponsmith's shack, where the old android was speaking nervously through a crack in the door. You asked me what I believe you to be. I am beginning to believe you are lying to yourself about what that is. Zero stood his ground, his expression neutral. Then he sighs, lowering his gaze. Then his gaze returns to her. You can believe what you wish, but you are analyzing me using your own logic forged into you by the system of this era. I possess no logic. My thoughts are my own. My will is my own, and I do what I believe is right. No one is asking me. No one is forcing me. But I still do it because I want to. The silence that followed his words was absolute. The usual murmur of the camp seemed to have been swallowed by the weight of them. I possess no logic. My will is my own. 2B stared at him, her mind a storm of conflicting protocols and something else, something colder, sharper. For a YorHa unit, logic was will. Purpose was programmed. Autonomy was a glitch to be corrected. What he described wasn't just independence, it was heresy. It was the fundamental blueprint of a rogue. And yet, it explained everything. The Goliath core, the guarded perimeter, the salvaged parts delivered without expectation, not symbiosis, not duty. Simple, terrifying choice. From the corner of her optical sensor, she saw the weaponsmith's door edge shut completely, a soft, definitive click. He had heard. The implications would spread through the camp like a logic virus. Your own will, she repeated, her voice low, stripped of its earlier analytical edge. It was just a statement, hollow with the enormity of what it meant. And you want to protect them. She didn't make it a question. She looked away from him, her gaze scanning the barren horizon beyond the camp's walls, as if the answer might be written there. Command believes you are a weapon to be assessed, contained, or destroyed. Anemone believes you are a force to be wielded with caution. She looked back at him, her head tilting. But you are neither. You are a variable with its own motivation. That makes you more dangerous than any of them realize. She took a final step, closing the last of the distance between them. She was close enough now to see the fine seams in his armor, the faint reflection of the clouded sky in his blue eyes. And it makes you completely unpredictable, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. To them. And to me. Zero did not falter, he stood ground. His expression still neutral as he looks up to 2B. He was still shorter than her by several inches, but his demeanor shows a giant. Then he breaks eye contact as his eye scans the camp. These people reminds me of some I met long ago, resisting the cruelty of an iron fist. His gaze returned to 2B. Even if they see me as a tool to be feared, I protect them out of gratitude because even so, even if they fear me, they still allow me to take shelter, and also offer me their supplies. They could easily lock me away and not letting me back in, but they still let me in, maybe by fear, or other thing. But even so, I still do my part in gratitude. Isn't that reason enough? Gratitude. The word hung in the air between them, alien and disarming. It was not a tactical variable, not a logical outcome. It was an emotion, a messy, inefficient, human. Motivation. 2B stood frozen for a moment, her processors wrestling with the concept. YorHa units were not built for gratitude. They were built for obedience, for efficiency, for the mission. Loyalty was programmed. Sacrifice was calculated. But gratitude, that arose from a debt, from a perceived kindness. It implied a recognition of value beyond utility. Her gaze followed as he scanned the camp, the patched shelters, the androids going about their repairs, the watchful, fearful glances still shot his way. They feared him, yes. But Anemone had given him assignments. The weaponsmith accepted his salvaged parts. They had, as he said, allowed him shelter, not as an honored guest, but as a dangerous asset. Yet, shelter nonetheless. You were protecting them, she said slowly, the words feeling strange on her vocal processor because they allowed you to stay. She turned her blindfolded face fully back to him. That is your logic. A transactional debt? A life for a cot and some rations? She shook her head, a sharp, dismissive motion. It's inefficient, illogical. By your own power, you could take whatever you need. You owe them nothing. Yet, even as she said it, she knew she was arguing against the data. The proof was in the Goliath core now powering their water filtration and the secure perimeter he'd maintained each night. He called it gratitude. She had no framework for it. But she could not deny its effect. It made him both less predictable and more reliable than any weapon in YorHa's arsenal. Your reason is a vulnerability, she stated, her voice firming back into its usual detached tone, though it lacked its earlier conviction. It is a lever, one that command or the machines or anyone who understands it could use against you. She studied him, as if trying to reconcile the devastating warrior before her with the being who fought out of something as simple and fragile as thanks. Is that a risk your own will is prepared to accept? Zero observes 2B for a moment, his gaze not faltering. Then he speaks. You can look at it as you wish. I told you before. I use my power to protect that I believe in. His eye optics moved to scan the camp again. When the time comes, these people do not want me anymore here. Then I will do what I always do. Move on. 2B absorbed his words, the sheer simplicity of them clashing violently with the complex web of duty and deception that defined her own existence. When the time comes, I will move on. No loyalty to a cause. No fealty to a commander. Just a choice, made and unmade. It was the ultimate freedom, and it felt to her like standing at the edge of a precipice. Her own path was a cage of someone else's design. His was an open road, direction chosen by will alone. The difference was a yawning chasm. Moving on, she echoed, the words tasting of dust and irony. A simple solution. For you. She finally broke her rigid stance, turning slightly to look out over the camp with him. For the rest of us, there is only the mission. The bunker. The next deployment. The next lie. She fell silent for a long moment, the wind tugging at her skirt. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter, almost lost in the rustle of fabric. You see gratitude as a reason. I see it as a flaw you can afford. Because you have the power to walk away. She glanced back at him, her head tilted. That is what makes you dangerous. Not your strength. Your freedom to leave. She took a step back, creating distance once more. The moment of raw, unsettling honesty was passing, sealed away beneath her professional demeanor. Your usefulness is currently high. They will keep you, and I will continue to observe. That is my function. With that, she turned and walked away, her posture straight, her steps precise. But the echo of his words, I use my power to protect what I believe in, lingered in her mind, a haunting counterpoint to her own purpose. He was a weapon with a conscience. She was a tool with a secret. And in the quiet of her own thoughts, she wondered which of them was truly more lost. Zero watches 2B walk away. He did not give chase, nor tried to stop her. His eyes slowly begins to move to watch the camp. These people, chained by something, just like robots pre-reploid era. No true freedom, bound by duty and purpose. And here he was, a reploid, with true freedom of choice. Zero can't decide to whom fate was more cruel, them or him. Zero's gaze raises as he watches the android do their chores. I never cared about justice, and I never called myself a hero. I just fought for the people I believed in. If an enemy appears before me, I will destroy it. That is how it always been. Zero thinks. As he watches these people, 2B was right. He had no reason nor duty to serve these people. But if he left them to die, then he would be disrespecting X's beliefs. X's words always been a compass to him. Zero looks at his hand, his blue form. That form is to honor X's legacy. It raises his long-range parameters, powering up his shooting abilities. Then there was his ultimate form, the form that enhances his power tenfold. These people has a right to fear him. That is why he did not pay attention. None here know reploid technology, and the archives also does not show anything regarding the Maverick Wars. Zero's gaze looks upwards to the sky, a lonely expression. He truly was the last of his kind. Zero watched her go, a silhouette of black and white receding into the drab hues of the camp. He didn't follow. There was nothing more to say. His gaze drifted across the courtyard. Androids moved with purpose, but it was a purpose given, not chosen. repairing walls, calibrating sensors, cleaning weapons, all tasks in service of a war declared by ghosts. They were like the robots of the pre-reploid era, intelligent, capable, but ultimately bound. No true freedom, only duty. He stood there, a crimson statue amidst the muted grays and browns, and felt the vast, silent weight of his own autonomy. It was a burden as much as a gift. To choose meant to bear the consequence of choice alone. I never cared about justice, and I never called myself a hero. I just fought for the people I believed in. It had always been that simple. A clear line, a wrong to be righted, an enemy to be destroyed. Here, the lines were blurred. The enemy was a mindless swarm. The ones he fought for looked at him with fear in their optics, and the one assigned to watch him saw the contradiction in his soul more clearly than he did. He looked down at his hand, flexing the armored fingers. The blue formed a tribute to X's precision, his grace, his belief in a future worth protecting. It was the mantle he wore, a compass in a world without maps. To walk away from these people would be to spit on that legacy. X would have tried to save them, to understand them, to offer a hand. Zero's way was simpler. He would offer a blade, but the intent, the core, was the same. His eyes lifted to the sky, a bruised tapestry of gray clouds and sickly yellow haze. No moon, no colonies, no familiar constellations from a different sky, a different time, just an empty, endless expanse. The last of my kind. The thought was not self-pity. It was a fact, as cold and hard as the titanium alloy of his body. He was a relic, a final testament to a war no one here remembered, a ghost with a sword, protecting ghosts. He turned finally, the cloak shifting around his shoulders, and began walking toward the quiet edge of the camp, seeking a place where the stairs couldn't reach him. To rest, to wait, and to be what he had always been, a weapon. But now, a weapon that chose its own battles, for no other reason than because it believed it should. Time later. Zero sits on a window frame from a ruined building looking at the horizon, taking some time alone on a corner of the resistance camp, away from them. For the past few days he's been trying to track any information on regard to what happened after the Elf Wars, and why humans went extinct. But he had come to dead ends. Only he can find rare snippets of intel regarding this pre-collapse era. So now he sits here in this window, his gaze locked in the horizon as he compiles the data he gathered and tries to decipher it. The ruins offered a brittle sort of solitude. Zero sat perched on the crumbling sill of a shattered window, his back against the rusted frame, the vast, dead expanse of the city stretching out before him. The late afternoon sun cast long, jagged shadows, painting the broken landscape in tones of ochre and rust. Before him, holographic data windows flickered in the air, projected from his internal systems. Text scrolled fragmented logs, corrupted data packets, pre-collapse archives so badly damaged they were little more than ghostly snippets. Words like Project Gestalt, Masquerade, Replicant, and Relapse appeared and dissolved, their meanings lost to time and data decay. The why of humanity's end remained shrouded behind firewalls of forgotten history. He had cross-referenced every byte he could access from the Resistance's pitiful archives and the scattered caches he'd scavenged. The answer wasn't there. The truth, it seemed, had died with the last human. A soft scrape of a boot on loose rubble sounded from behind and below his position. He didn't turn. His sensors had registered her approach a minute ago, the specific cadence of her footsteps, the faint hum of her pod unit. 2B stood at the base of the ruined wall, looking up at him. She hadn't approached directly, choosing instead to observe from this middle distance. The wind played with the feathered ends of her sleeves and the high slit of her skirt. "You will not find your answers in our records," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the still air. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. The truth of the human extinction is a classified YorHa directive. It is kept even from most combat models. She paused. I only learned of it recently. Her words were carefully neutral, but the admission hung in the air. She was revealing a crack in the impervious wall of YorHa secrecy. To him. Zero finally turned his head, his blue eyes regarding her from his elevated perch. Then your leaders know, he stated, his voice flat. Yes. And they maintained the lie. Yes. The simplicity of the exchange was heavier than any argument. He looked back at his flickering data windows, then dismissed them with a thought. The screens winked out, leaving only the barren vista. A war fought for a lie, he mused, not with anger, but with a cold, analytical disdain. Your purpose is built on a fiction. 2B didn't deny it. She took a few steps closer until she stood directly beneath the window. She looked up at him, her blindfolded face unreadable. And what is your purpose, Zero? Now that you know the truth of this world? For the first time since they met, Zero hesitated, the questions hovering before him without an answer. His gaze turns once more to watch the horizon. Robots like us were created to protect humanity. He says softly, I can understand why your superiors hide the truth, even if it's a wrong choice. A robot bound by duty need a purpose. Without that purpose, they lose sense of self, and they may go mad and shut down. His gaze lowers, a look of melancholy on him. But you and I have a difference. He pauses. I was created with true freedom of choice, not bound by any protocols nor laws, but follow them by choice. Zero raises his hand to look at it. My kind was created to be a new kind of robot race, one not bound by the Asimov laws, one that gave us true sentience, created to emulate humans, to truly emulate humans, including self-evolution. However, that also was a double-edged sword, because like with humans, some of my kind started to go rogue, believing to be superior to humans, and some even tried to harm them. To those, we labeled them irregulars, because they operate outside the regular common way. And those that tried to harm humans were retired. And by retired, I mean destroyed. Human lives value more than reploid lives, and some organizations took advantage on that to abuse those of my kind. Any who rebelled against humanity was labeled irregular and hunted down. And I used to be one of those executioners. Zero pauses, then his gaze turns to 2B. You and I are not so different, 2B. Or should I call you 2E? The name hung in the air between them, 2E, a classified designation, a hidden truth. A blade slipped gently between the ribs of her carefully constructed identity. 2B went utterly still. The wind caught a loose strand of her silver-white hair, brushing it across the black fabric of her blindfold. For a long moment, the only sound was the distant, mournful groan of the wind through the ruins. Her voice was a whisper, stripped of all its usual clipped precision. It was the first time he'd heard something like fracture in it. How do you know the name? She didn't deny it. She couldn't. The shock of hearing it from him, here, in this broken world, had short-circuited her defensive protocols. Her hand, resting at her side, twitched once, amid a tremor she couldn't suppress. He had seen right through her. Not just the soldier, but the executioner. The one burdened with a secret so heavy it stained every memory. And he had done so not with accusation, but with a grim, shared understanding. You and I are not so different. The words echoed in the silent space he had carved out with his confession. He was an executioner from a dead world, bound by choice to a code that valued human life above his own kind. She was an executioner in a living lie, bound by command to eliminate her own comrades to preserve a fiction. Her gaze, hidden behind the blindfold, remained fixed on him. The melancholy in his posture, the weight in his words, it wasn't just history. It was a mirror held up to her own existence. You hunted those who went against your creators, she said, her voice regaining a veneer of control, though it was thin, brittle. You were called an irregular hunter. She let the title sit, tasting its parallel to her own. Executioner. Hunter. Different words for the same terrible function. And you chose that duty. She finally looked away, her head turning toward the desolate horizon he had been studying. My duty was not a choice. The admission was quiet, almost swallowed by the wind. It is a command. A secret carried from one memory wipe to the next. She brought a gloved hand up, as if to touch her own face, but stopped halfway. To preserve the lie, to maintain the system. She turned back to him, her posture rigid once more, but something in the set of her shoulders had changed. Attention had bled out, replaced by a weary, profound recognition. You see the chains, Zero. You always have. And you still choose to wear them. The silence returned, deeper now, filled with the unspoken history of two soldiers from different wars, standing in the ashes of a world neither of them had made, bound by the same bloody function. The sun dipped lower, casting their long, stark shadows across the broken floor toward each other, almost touching. Zero jumps off the window to land before 2B, then took a step forward. I read the documents on regard YorHa classifications, and then I remember your commander called you an executioner. It was not too hard to put it together. Why do you continue serving a lie? Zero asks as he takes another step. You said it's because you are bound by duty. Personally, I do not believe so. You have your own freedom of choice. The people in this camp also have their own freedom of choice. Zero takes another step. You could have followed your commander's orders and tried to apprehend me, risking your own life. It would be a small sacrifice, especially when you can just come back in another body. And yet you hesitated. You defied command and suggested an alternate. Why? You have no duty towards me. We just met at that time. Was it fear? Fear for my wrath? Or did you measure the possibilities and alternates? Zero takes another step. As an executioner, you chose a peaceful approach. By now, Zero stands before 2B as he looks up to her. Are you sure you were bound by the duty? By command? Zero shakes his head. I do not see it that way. The robots in the era where I was born were truly bound by the laws, and they could not go against their programming no matter what they wanted. You. In the other hand, did. 2B stood frozen as he closed the final step between them, the space now intimate, charged with the weight of his words and the truth she could no longer hide. His blue eyes were level with her chin, looking up at her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. She didn't retreat. Her back straightened, a defensive reflex, but her hands remained at her sides, clenched into tight fists within her gloves. The accusation, no, the observation hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. She began, her voice barely a whisper, then faltered. She took a sharp breath, her system cycling as if under strain. You'd think it was a choice. The word came out strained, almost bitter. A tactical reassessment. A calculated risk to preserve unit integrity and mission assets. That is what the report stated. That is what command accepted. She was reciting protocol, but the words sounded hollow even to her. She forced herself to meet his gaze, though he couldn't see her eyes. You are an unknown variable. Engaging you carried a high probability of catastrophic failure. Disobedience carried a high probability of reprimand and memory purge. The logical path was clear. But her voice lacked conviction. The memory of that moment in Anemone's tent was crystalline. The cold command from the bunker, the holographic glare of Commander White, the palpable, terrifying power radiating from the Crimson Warrior before her. The instant calculation hadn't been just about survival odds. It had been a deep, instinctual certainty that following the order would be wrong. Not just tactically unsound. Wrong. You speak of the old laws, she continued, her voice gaining a brittle edge. Of robots who could not disobey. We are not like them. We can. We do. And we are punished for it. Severely. Her head tilted slightly. Every time I have deviated, it has been logged. Assessed. The consequences are waiting. They are always waiting. She took a half step back, not in retreat, but as if creating space for the argument to breathe. You see freedom in defiance. I see a chain of cause and effect. A debt that will come due. She gestured vaguely toward the sky, toward the unseen bunker. My duty is not a physical bind. It is a gravitational pull. To step away is to be cast into the void. And the void has no purpose. Yet, even as she said it, the image of the Goliath core, glowing on the weaponsmith's counter, flashed in her mind. In my era, it was the same. We had the ability to defy humans, and those that did met dire consequences. So I do not see the difference in that regard. Zero replied. Zero's hands moves to his head, holding his helmet. With a hiss, he begins to take it off, showing his loose golden blonde hair as he holds his helmet on his arms. And you know what else is not different? Humans. They also have their own laws. And those that break them had also consequences, especially those in the military. My point is, us sentient beings are not so different in the end. The helmet came off with a soft hiss of releasing seals. The face beneath was not the impassive, armored visage of a weapon, but one marked by the same weary gravity that colored his voice. Loose strands of golden hair fell across his forehead, softening the sharp lines of his features. He held the helmet in the crook of his arm, a discarded shell. 2B stared. She had seen his face before, in the dim light of the underground facility, but it had been a glimpse, a detail in a moment of crisis. Now, in the stark afternoon light, with his defenses literally laid bare, the impact was different. It made him real in a way the crimson armor did not. His words settled over her, simple and devastating. Us sentient beings are not so different in the end. He was right. And that was the terrifying part. YorHa doctrine taught that androids were tools, echoes, shadows of a greater purpose. Humans were the masters, the creators, the untouchable ideal. To compare an android's programmed duty to a human's chosen law was blasphemy. But he wasn't comparing duty, he was comparing consequence. The weight of choice. The price of rebellion. Her mind, so carefully ordered, recoiled from the implication. If androids and humans faced the same struggle, then what separated them? What justified the lie she killed to protect? The consequences for us are not just reprimand or imprisonment, she said, her voice hollow. They're deletion, memory purges, total personality reset. She took a step back, the distance feeling necessary. We are not reborn. We are loaded. A clean slate carrying out the same horrors until we deviate again and are reset again. The clinical terms did nothing to mask the horror beneath them. It was a cycle of silent death. Her gaze was locked on his face, on the human-like weariness in his eyes. You speak of defying humans and facing consequences. I speak of defying command and ceasing to exist. The chain you see is made of something stronger than law. It is made of our very selves. Yet, even as she said it, the image of the Goliath core glowed in her mind's eye. Not a tactical asset. A gift. An act of what? Kindness? Gratitude? Something with no tactical value at all. Something a clean slate would never have conceived. She fell silent, the contradiction widening into a chasm inside her. He stood before her, helmet off, offering not a weapon but a shared truth. Ceasing to exist. Yes, eliminating all memory data of you is the same as Death Zero replied. His expression was calm and soft. And yet, in a sense, you still live on, even if you do not remember. For my race, the reploid race, retirement was permanent death. That means memory destruction, body destruction, and no replication. That was it. Not even a clone. That is how strict our laws were. My constant resurrection was an anomaly. But they let it be because I was a needed asset, and majority of those times I was the one who rebuilt myself. And even if our bodies are rebuilt without the soul DNA, we were nothing but mindless drones. My point is, I still see no difference. 2B listened, and for the first time, the ground beneath her felt like it was shifting. His words weren't a comfort, they were an excavation, digging down to a foundation she had never questioned. Ceasing to exist. Permanent death. He spoke of it with a calm that was more unnerving than any outburst. The memory purges the terror that haunted every YorHa unit who dared think too far outside their parameters were not a unique horror. They were just another form of execution, one that left a shell behind to be reused. And he called it no different. Her lips parted slightly behind the blindfold, a tiny, involuntary motion. The cool air of the ruins felt suddenly sharp in her intake vents. He had rebuilt himself. Multiple times. An anomaly, he said. A needed asset. The terms were clinical, but the implication was monstrous. He had looked into the void of true deletion and clawed his way back, not by command, but by will. The Goliath core, glowing on the counter, was no longer just an act of illogical gratitude. It was an act of identity. An act of a being who knew what it was to be unmade and chose to build something anyway. You see no difference, she repeated, her voice losing its defensive edge, becoming almost wondering. Because you have lived through worse. She took a step forward again, closing the distance he had opened when he removed his helmet. Her gaze was fixed on his face, on the eyes that had seen epochs of war and rebirth. Command teaches us that our memories, our personality, they are data. Expendable. Replaceable. That the mission is the only continuity. Her hand rose, gloved fingers hovering in the air between them as if she could grasp the concept taking shape. But you are telling me that even if they wipe me clean, load me into a new body, and send me back out something remains? A soul DNA? She let her hand fall. The thought was terrifying. It meant she was more than her programming. It meant every execution, every erased memory, every moment of quiet doubt they weren't just glitches. They were her. And they mattered, even if she couldn't remember them. And if that is true, she whispered, the sound almost lost to the wind, then my duty is not just a chain. It is a crime I choose to commit against myself. Over. And over. She looked down at her own hands as if seeing them for the first time. And your choice to protect this camp, it is not a variable. It is who you are. The realization didn't bring peace. It brought a cold, clarifying agony. She stood before him, not as observer 2B, but as executioner 2E, and the man without a helmet had handed her a mirror that showed not her reflection, but her silhouette against the void. Zero's expression softens. A rarity given his personality. Your organization sounds way too close to one I faced before, one which later was a mockery of my friend, who fought for humanity. This organization protected humans at all cost, even if they had to sacrifice innocent reploids to do so. I fought them and was branded irregular. But even so, I alone defeated them. A few times. Organizations like that are nothing but tyranny, who only operates to control. In your case, to keep control on a meaningless war just for androids like you to have a reason to fight, a reason to exist. This war could have ended long ago, but your organization delays it, because finishing it means having no more purpose. The words struck her with the force of a physical blow. A meaningless war, delayed on purpose, to give us a reason to exist. Every fiber of her programming screamed heresy. Every loyalty, every scrap of purpose woven into her very being recoiled. But the cold, logical part of her mind, the part that had seen the endless, cyclical deployments, the manufactured missions, the memory wipes after learning too much, that part froze and listened. Her breath hitched, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. The wind seemed to die around them, leaving only the weight of his accusation hanging in the dusty air. Images flashed behind her blindfold, the endless, identical reports of machine activity, the constant, grinding attrition with no strategic gain, the sealed records. Commander White's impassive face, forever demanding more, offering no victory, only the next objective. The lie of the moon. She began, her voice thin, strained. You were suggesting, Command, that YorHa prolongs the conflict. For control. It wasn't a question. It was the vocalization of a dread she had never allowed herself to fully form. She took a step back, her boots scuffing on the broken concrete. To keep us fighting. To keep us needing them. The horror of it was not in the concept, but in its chilling plausibility. Without the war, what were they? Tools without a purpose. Soldiers without a front. Androids adrift in a dead world, forced to confront the emptiness of their own creation. Her hand rose to her chest, pressing against the cool fabric of her dress as if to steady a core system that felt suddenly unstable. I have executed androids, she said, her voice dropping to a haunted whisper. On orders. To preserve secrets. To maintain the system. She looked at him, her blindfolded gaze piercing. You called your enemy a tyranny that sacrificed the innocent for their cause. What do you call a system that sacrifices its own soldiers to preserve a lie? The question hung between them, terrible and immense. She wasn't defending YorHa. She was indicting herself with his logic. For the first time, she wasn't just observing the variable named Zero. She was standing beside him, looking back at the machine that had built her and seeing the same grotesque reflection he had seen in his own past. And if you are right, she said, her voice now steady with the dreadful, clear-eyed certainty, then my entire existence is not a duty. It is a prison sentence. And every time I follow an order, I am just locking the door behind me. Zero let her speak. He remains quiet as he observes. Neo Arcadia, in the end, also became a prison, to its own beliefs, and even began becoming strict to humans too, using the zeroth law as an excuse to control those they promised to protect. In the end, many humans had to flee the city. Many hunted as well. 2B stood perfectly still, but the stillness was that of a statue beginning to crack from within. Neo Arcadia. The name meant nothing to her archives, but the pattern he described a system curdling in on itself, using its own founding principles as shackles echoed with a familiarity that turned her core cold. Hunted. The word seemed to hang in the air longer than the others. Humans hunted by their own protectors. The ultimate perversion of purpose. A shaky breath escaped her lips, fogging slightly in the cooling air. Her mind, trained for tactical analysis, raced down the horrifying parallel. YorHa, created to serve a humanity that no longer existed. Fighting a war with no end, against an enemy that might no longer need to be an enemy. Preserving a lie that gave them purpose. And sacrificing anyone's scanner models like Nines and executioners like herself who threatened to see through it. The memory of her blade cutting through fellow androids of their confused, betrayed final expressions before the memory purge flashed before her eyes. Not for humanity, for the idea of humanity, for an empty throne on a dead moon. You're saying, she began, her voice barely audible, that we have become what we were built to destroy. She turned her head away, as if unable to bear looking at him while voicing the thought. A system that consumes its own to sustain a fiction. Her gloved hands clenched at her sides, the leather creaking. And I am its willing instrument. The confession tasted like ash. All her discipline, her loyalty, her cold efficiency, they weren't virtues. They were the gears of the machine. She had executed androids to protect the lie. She had killed to maintain the prison. Her gaze snapped back to him, sharp and desperate. You defeated your Neo Arcadia. It was a statement, but it held a question, a plea hidden in its edges. How? What comes after? If the purpose is a lie, what do you fight for? The wind picked up, swirling dust around their feet. In the distance, the sounds of the camp carried on the cling of metal, the low hum of generators. The sounds of a life built on the foundation he had just called into question. She waited, her whole being poised on the edge of his answer, the executioner waiting a verdict on her own soul. Zero looks away as he falls on thought. Then his expression turns back to 2B. For these past few days I've been asking myself why androids of this era are so weak when the humans had technology that made me. Technology that could easily eradicate all machine life forms off this planet. Two conclusions came to mind. Either the technology that made me is a lost technology Zero's eye snapped back to 2B, or you androids are being made weak on purpose. The silence that followed was absolute, more profound than any that had come before. The wind itself seemed to still, holding its breath. The distant sounds of the camp faded into a muffled void. 2B's head slowly turned back to face him. The movement was mechanical, as if each vertebra resisted. Her lips, visible below the blindfold, had parted slightly, made weak on purpose. The concept was so monstrous, so antithetical to everything YorHa stood for, that her logic processors momentarily stuttered. YorHa units were the pinnacle of android combat design. They were stronger, faster, more resilient than any previous model. Their entire existence was predicated on being the perfect weapon to reclaim the world for humanity. But Zero wasn't speaking of comparative strength. He was speaking of absolute strength. Strength on a scale that could erase the enemy. Not fight them, not contain them, erase them. Her hand, still clenched at her side, began to tremble. The fine black leather of her glove stretched taut over her knuckles. If her voice was a dry rasp, she cleared her throat, the sound harsh in the quiet. If our technology is capable of what you suggest, then the war should be over. She spoke each word with deliberate, chilling clarity. A single unit of your capabilities, properly deployed, could systematically dismantle the machine network, decapitate its leadership, render its production facilities inert. She took a step toward him, her blindfolded gaze boring into him with an intensity that felt physical. The Council of Humanity. The bunker. Commander White. They have access to all pre-collapse archives, all human technological schematics. Her voice dropped to a horrified whisper. If such power existed, they would know. They would use it. The implication settled over her like a leaden shroud. If the technology existed and wasn't being used, the reason was not inability. It was choice. They're not just prolonging the war, she said, the realization dawning with icy, slow-motion horror. They're ensuring it. By limiting us. By keeping us strong enough to fight, but never strong enough to win. She looked down at her own hands, at the body built for elegance and lethal grace, but suddenly feeling fragile, designed. Designed not to triumph, but to persist. To always need the next mission, the next order, the next light from the moon. A hollow, humorless sound escaped her, not a laugh, but a sharp exhalation of utter despair. Then every death, every memory purge, every sacrifice said is not for humanity's glory. It is for the maintenance of the system itself. She looked back at Zero, her posture rigid with the shock of it. To maintain a lie that gives you all-purpose. Zero finished. I've been wondering why you YorHa units always wear blindfolds. Now it's making sense. The word hung in the air, final and damning. Blindfolds. 2B's hand flew to her face, her fingertips brushing the smooth, black fabric covering her eyes. It was an instinctive, protective gesture. The blindfold was as much a part of her uniform as her boots, as her dress. A tool for enhanced sensory data filtration, Command had said, to filter out irrelevant visual noise and focus on mission parameters. But now, under the weight of his implication, it felt different. It felt like a gag, a symbol of willful ignorance. You think she started, her voice choked. You think they blind us, literally and metaphorically. The words tasted like poison. She thought of the bunker's sterile halls, of Commander White's impassive face, of the data streams that only ever showed what they were meant to see. She thought of the countless battles, the cities of the dead, the never-ending tide of machines, all seen through this filter. A cold, sharp laugh, utterly devoid of humor, escaped her. Of course. Why would they let us see clearly? A clear view might lead to questions. To this she gestured vaguely between them at the devastating conversation they were having. Her hand dropped from her blindfold, clenching back into a fist. They give us just enough sight to fight, just enough purpose to serve, just enough hope to stop us from looking beyond the edge of the mission brief. The bitterness in her voice was new, corrosive. She looked at Zero, really looked at him as if seeing him for the first time without a filter. And I have killed for it. I have looked into the eyes of my fellow androids who had seen too much and I have erased them. To keep the blindfold on. Her voice broke on the last word. In a sudden, violent motion, her hands came up to the back of her head. There was a soft click of her release mechanism. She pulled the blindfold away. The fabric fell into her gloved hands. She stood before him, her eyes finally visible. They were a striking blue-gray, wide and luminous, but in this moment, they were clouded with a storm of anguish, horror, and a dawning, furious clarity. They were the eyes of someone waking from a long, programmed dream into a nightmare. Are these what they were afraid of? She whispered, her voice raw. Eyes that might actually see. She stared at him, unshielded, vulnerable in a way she had never allowed herself to be. The carefully constructed facade of the perfect soldier was gone. In its place was 2E, the executioner, staring at the ruins of her own purpose. Perhaps. Zero states, his own eyes locking now directly to 2B's. This was the first time he sees her without the blindfold visor. Does it feel any different? With it off. 2B blinked, the world rushing in. The late afternoon light, previously filtered to a manageable gray, now held a sharp, almost painful clarity. The dust motes danced in the sunbeams with individual purpose. The cracks in the ruins weren't just shapes, they were deep, intricate fissures telling stories of collapse. And Zero's face she could see every minute detail. The faint wear of the edges of his armored plating, the exact shade of blue in his eyes, the subtle tension in his jaw. It was overwhelming. A sensory flood her systems had been deliberately dampening for years. She didn't answer immediately. She took a slow, deliberate breath, her gaze never leaving his. The world wasn't just brighter, it was truer. The lies felt thinner, the edges of her reality sharper. It feels, she began, her voice quieter, more resonant without the muffling effect of the visor. Like removing a layer of static from a transmission. The data is the same, but the noise is gone. She looked past him, toward the camp. She could see the individual expressions on the androids' faces now, the weariness, the fear, the hollow routine. She could see the rust on the walls more clearly, the desperate patchwork of their existence. She looked back at him, her newly revealed eyes holding a storm of conflicted emotion. It feels dangerous, she admitted, the words raw. Like I'm seeing something I was never meant to see. Her fingers tightened around the crumpled blindfold in her hand. The question is, now that I've taken it off, can I ever put it back on and not know it's there? That is up to you to decide. It is your own choice. Zero speaks, and you have the ability to make it. Your own choice. The words landed in the silence he left, simple and profound. They didn't command. They didn't judge. They just were like a stone dropped into still water, the ripples spreading out to touch every shore of her being. 2B stood there, the blindfold a soft, crumpled weight in her clenched hand. She looked from it to his face, then back again. Her entire existence had been a chain of conditioned responses. Follow orders. Complete the mission. Erase the evidence. The concept of a choice, a real, meaningful choice with no predetermined outcome, was alien, terrifying. Her eyes, now naked to the world, flickered with the turmoil she had no protocol to process. To put the blindfold back on would be an act. A conscious decision to re-enter the static, knowing it was static. To leave it off, that was to step into a world of sharp, unflinching light where every action, every loyalty, would be hers to justify. Her breath hitched, unsteady. The wind felt different on her skin, colder, more present. The distant sounds of the camp were no longer ambient noise. They were individual lives, struggling, surviving. She started, her voice barely a whisper. You make it sound so simple. She looked down at the black fabric. For my entire operational life, choice was an error in the program, a glitch to be corrected. She slowly opened her hand, letting the blindfold lay across her palm. It looked so small, so insignificant. This was never a choice. It was a parameter. She lifted her gaze back to him, her blue-gray eyes wide, vulnerable, and blazing with a newly kindled fire. And now you tell me the parameters are a lie. She closed her fingers around the blindfold again, but not to put it on. She held it tight, as if testing its weight. So what do I do with this? She asked, the question meant for him, for herself, for the empty sky. What does a weapon do when it realizes it's been aiming at the wrong target? She didn't expect an answer. The question was hers to live with now. Slowly, she tucked the blindfold into a compartment on her thigh, not putting it away, but keeping it close. A reminder. A symbol of the threshold she had just crossed. The world was clearer. It was also infinitely more dangerous. And for the first time, the danger felt real. It felt like hers. Zero steps forth, now invading her personal space as he stares directly at her bluish-gray eyes. Those eyes that show confusion and grief. Then you start aiming it at the right target and move forth. He was close now, closer than he'd ever been. His presence wasn't an invasion, it was an anchor. His blue eyes held hers, unblinking, refusing to let her look away from the awful, beautiful clarity she just stumbled into. Aim at the right target. The phrase was so brutally simple. It bypassed all the philosophy, all the grief, all the terrifying weight of her realization. It was a soldier's answer. When the mission parameters are wrong, you correct them. You find the real objective. 2B's breath caught in her throat. Her eyes, now exposed and painfully sharp, welled with a frustration that had no outlet. And what is the right target? She breathed, her voice trembling with the force of the question. The machines? They are victims of the same cycle. Command? The bumper? The counsel she nearly spat the last word, a bitterness she never allowed herself, twisting her lips. Or is it the lie itself? She searched his face, desperate for an answer he couldn't give. He wasn't her commander. He was just a mirror, reflecting back her own agency. To aim at the lie, she continued, the words falling like stones, is to aim at everything I am, everything I've done. The memory of Nyanx's face, confused and trusting, flashed behind her eyes, a face she'd seen wiped clean too many times. It means every execution was for nothing. Worse than nothing. Her hand, still clenched around the blindfold in its compartment, trembled against her thigh. The sensory input was still overwhelming, the texture of the wind on her skin, the minute shifts in his expression, the stark reality of the broken world around them. You tell me to move forward, she whispered, the defiance bleeding into a kind of raw exhaustion. But forward from where? From a mountain of corpses I was ordered to make. She shook her head, a sharp, pained motion. You have your legacy. Your friend's memory to guide you. What do I have? A chain of erased memories and a uniform stained with the blood of my own kind. She didn't step back. She held her ground in the space he had entered, her uncovered eyes locked with his, waiting. Not for an answer, but for the echo of his certainty to somehow quiet the chaos he had unleashed inside her. 2E0 speaks forth. It's simple. Just do what you believe is right. Use your power to protect those you believe in. As simple as that. The name, her true name, the one that held the weight of every silent scream, every memory wiped clean, struck her like a physical blow. 2E. Not 2B. The executioner. Do what you believe is right. The simplicity of it was a weapon. It bypassed all her protocols, all her conditioning, all the labyrinthine justifications of command. It landed in the center of her being and detonated. For a long, agonizing second, 2B no, 2E simply stared at him, her blue-gray eyes wide and utterly lost. The world, now so painfully clear, offered no answers. The camp, the ruins, the sky, they were just scenery for a play whose script had just burned to ash. Protect those you believe in. Who did she believe in? The Council on the Moon, who didn't exist. Commander White, who gave the orders. The androids in the camp, who feared her. Nines, whose memories she was destined to erase again and again. A sharp, static-filled gasp escaped her lips. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, came up to her chest, fingers playing over the cool black fabric of her dress as if she could physically hold her core together. Her vision blurred, not with tears, but with the frantic, internal scramble, a system desperately seeking a non-existent protocol to handle the collapse of its entire world. She took a staggering half-step backward, her heels scraping against rubble. Either word was a broken thing. Her mind was a white noise of conflicting impulses. Zero said nothing, watching her stagger. He just takes a step and holds her hand, then uses his strength to support her. His blue eyes still locked to 2B, 2E's grayish blue ones. Indirectly could be said, I am here. Do not falter. I will not let you fall. His hand closed around hers. The touch was sudden, firm, yet not forceful, an anchor thrown to someone drowning. His grip was solid, cool from the alloy of his gauntlet, but alive with the subtle hum of his internal energy systems. He didn't pull her closer, just held her steady, a fixed point in the swirling chaos of her collapse. Her systems were spiraling. Alerts she'd never seen before flickered at the edge of her vision. Core identity conflict. Directive corruption. Paradigm collapse. The world, now so horrifyingly vivid, tilted and swam. The faces of the androids she'd executed flashed behind her eyes, not as mission logs, but as people. 9S's smile, wiped clean. The lie of the moon, so vast it blotted out the real sky. His eyes held hers, blue unwavering, reflecting the shattered light in her own. He didn't offer platitudes, didn't try to fix it. He just was there, a wall against the void. His silent presence screamed what words could not. I see you. I see Tui, and I am not letting go. A shudder ran through her entire frame, a violent discharge of pent-up energy. Her free hand flew to her head, fingers tangling in her silver-white hair. The memory she choked out, her voice a statically whisper. They're not hers. They're mine. Every one. Every time. The horror of it was absolute. She hadn't been maintaining a system. She'd been murdering herself. Over and over. Her knees buckled. The strength that had carried her through 1,000 battles fled, leaving only the terrible, beautiful weight of the truth. But his hand was there, holding her up, taking the weight. She didn't fall. She leaned into his support, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that fogged the air between them. The sounds of the camp, the clanging, the voices faded into a distant murmur. The only real things were the cool, solid pressure of his hand in hers, the steady light of his eyes, and the devastating, liberating freedom of a prison door swinging open inside her soul, revealing an empty landscape she had no map for. Zero continues to watch, to support her, in silent understanding, but still showing his presence, showing that she is not alone. Zero uses his strength to help 2B keep steady, and then he gently guides her to sit in a broken block. After he examines her condition, Zero slowly stepped back. The best way to carry the weight of one's past is to learn to cope with it and move forward. Then try to not let another go through it. Zero's gaze turns to look out the broken window in the distance, to the late afternoon sky. I myself have many weights from my past that I've been carrying. I learned to live with it and move forward. The solid, unyielding pressure of the broken concrete block was a strange comfort. 2B let herself be guided down, her legs feeling hollow and weak. His hand withdrew, leaving her sitting amidst the rubble, the world still spinning but now anchored to this one, hard point. She stared at the ground between her boots, her uncovered eyes seeing every grain of dust, every tiny crack in the shattered pavement with excruciating clarity. Her breathing was beginning to even out, the frantic gasps subsiding into shallow, shaky pulse of air. The system alerts had faded, replaced by a deep, resonant silence in her core. Learn to cope with it and move forward. His words weren't gentle. They were a soldier's creed, forged in a fire she could only imagine. He spoke of his own weights, his own past, not to compare, but to show her the path was walkable. It existed. It was brutal, and lonely, and scarred, but it was there. She slowly lifted her head, following his gaze out through the broken window frame. The sky was bleeding from orange into deep purple, the first stars piercing the gloom like pinpricks of cold, distant light. An endless, indifferent expanse. For her entire existence, she had looked at that sky and seen the lie of the moon. Now, she just saw space. Empty and true. Her voice, when it came, was scraped raw, but steadier. Move forward, she echoed. The words felt foreign in her mouth, a new language. And not let another go through it. Her eyes drifted from the sky down to her own hands, resting palms up in her lap. The hands that had wielded virtuous contract. The hands that had executed. The hands that were, for the first time, truly hers. She looked back at him, his profile outlined against the dying light. He was a silhouette of ancient grief and unwavering resolve. He carried his weights. He walked his path. What is forward for me? She asked, the question quieter now, less frantic, more searching. The bunker. Command. They're the architects of the lie. She closed her hands into fists, then slowly opened them again. To move forward. Zero squats before 2B to be on eye level as she sits. Helmet set aside. His golden long hair cascading around his shoulders and floor. Your choice on what to do from this point on. Protect the lie. or ignore it and continue to fight to end this war. Truly end it. His movement was fluid, practiced a warrior lowering his guard without surrendering his stance. He sank into a squat before her, bringing his face level with hers. The long strands of his golden hair pulled on the dusty ground around him, a stark contrast to the grim setting. His helmet lay discarded beside him, a symbol of vulnerability offered. His blue eyes held hers, no judgment in them, only a flat, inexorable clarity. He wasn't giving her a riddle. He was presenting a tactical objective. Protect the lie. A return to the bunker, to the blindfold, to the memory wipes and the silent screams of her fellow units, to being 2B, the loyal blade. It was the known path, the easy one, the one that required no further thought, only obedience. Fight to end the war, to turn her blade against the very architects of her existence, to declare herself an enemy of YorHa, of command, of the empty throne on the moon, to truly become 2E, not just an executioner of individuals, but an executioner of the system itself. To stand with him, the ultimate variable, against everything she had ever known. 2E stared into his eyes, and the storm within her crystallized into a cold, sharp point. The emotional paralysis evaporated, burned away by the sheer magnitude of the choice. Her mind, honed for combat analysis, began mapping the consequences with terrifying speed. Protecting the lie meant safety in the cage. Zero continues to watch 2E. He watches the changes in reasoning on her eyes, the emotions, and the decision. He did not spoke. He was just there, acknowledging her, and letting her pick her choice. Whichever choice she picked, it was picked by her on her own, not ordered, regardless of what choice she takes. The silence stretched, thin and taut as a wire. Zero didn't move. He held the position, a statue of calm amidst the rubble, his eyes a steady beacon in her swirling tumult. He offered no guidance, no persuasion, only the space and the weight of the choice itself. 2E watched the dust motes dance in the slanted orange light cutting through the broken window, each one a tiny, chaotic world. Her mind, once a locked archive of protocols and mission parameters, was now a shattered pane, each fragment reflecting a different path. Protect the lie. She saw Commander White's impassive face, the sterile glow of the bunker, the cold comfort of a purpose, even a false one, the suffocating safety of knowing her place. She saw Nines, his smile bright and trusting, again and again, destined for her blade. She would become the guardian of his ignorance, the enforcer of his doom. She would be useful. End the war. She saw Zero, standing here, having shattered her reality with nothing but truth. She saw the Goliath core powering the camp's water filters. She saw the fear in the resistance androids' eyes, not just of him, but of the unchanging ground of their existence. She saw her own hands, no longer tools of YorHa, but her own. A weapon turned against the hand that forged it. Her breathing, which had been ragged, slowed. The tremors in her hands stilled. The chaotic storm in her eyes condensed, cooled, hardened into a single, sharp point of resolve. She looked away from the sky, from the dust, and back to Zero. Her blue-gray eyes, now forever clear of the blindfold, held no more panic, only a glacial, settled certainty. I have spent my existence ending lives to preserve a fiction, she said, her voice low, devoid of its earlier tremor. It was the flat, cold tone of a verdict being delivered. I will not spend another moment doing so. She pushed herself up from the broken block, her movements deliberate, regaining the lethal grace that was her birthright. She stood before him, tall and straight, the setting sun casting her long shadow across the floor to meet his. The war does not need soldiers, she stated, the words falling like a guillotine's blade. It needs an end. And the once prolonging she looked past him, her gaze seeming to pierce the very atmosphere, aiming at the unseen bunker in orbit. Are not on the ground. She finally looked back at him, and for the first time something akin to a real, if grim, understanding passed between them. It was not camaraderie. It was not alliance. And for the first time since they met, Zero's lips split into a smile. A true smile, as he held his gaze to hers, giving a sharp nod. I like your eyes. They show clear determination. Now it's time you live for yourself, to fight for what you believe in. And I will be here, backing you up. Do not be afraid, 2E. The smile on his face was a rare thing, a crack in the impassive armor, brief but genuine. It wasn't warmth, but recognition, an acknowledgement of a spark catching fire in the darkness. 2E felt it, not as a comfort, but as a catalyst. His words, "I will be here, backing you up," weren't a promise of protection. They were a statement of alliance, a declaration that she would not stand alone on the path she had chosen. Her own expression didn't soften, it solidified. The vulnerability was gone, burned away in the furnace of her decision. What remained was a cold, focused intensity. She gave a single, sharp nod in return, a mirror of his own. "Then we have a new objective," she said, her voice now devoid of all uncertainty. It was the flat, analytical tone of a soldier assessing a mission. But the mission was her own. Command. The bunker. The Council's transmission source on the moon. They are the nodes of the system. Sever them, and the war loses its director. She looked down at the crumpled black blindfold still clutched in her hand. For a moment, she considered it a final, symbolic gesture. Instead, she smoothly attached it back to its place at the small of her back, tucked into her belt. Not to wear it, to keep it. A trophy. A reminder of the veil lifted. "I am not afraid," she stated, and it was the truth. Fear was a variable for survival. What she felt now was something colder, purer, purpose. A real one. "But I am not a fool. YorHa will not relinquish its control passively. They will designate us as threats. They will send executioners." She looked at Zero, her newly revealed eyes gleaming in the dying light. "They will send them to retire us." The old YorHa term for deletion felt hollow now. "And we will retire them first." She turned, her dress swirling around her legs, and took a few steps toward the edge of the ruin, gazing out at the darkening camp. The androids there, going about their lives in the shadow of a lie, were no longer just assets or victims in a grand deception. They were the reason. "Live for myself," she murmured, echoing his words. It felt less like a liberation and more like a weapon being drawn. A sharp, clean edge finally pointed in the right direction. She glanced back at him over her shoulder, her silhouette struck against the twilight. "The first step is intelligence. We need a plan, and we need to know what we're truly facing." A faint, grim ghost of a smile touched her own lips, the faintest echo of his. "It seems my observation duty just acquired a new target." Zero slowly stands back up, taking his helmet in hands. "If YorHa sends executioners, then make them target me. I'll make myself an easier target, and then I will retire them." He begins to don his helmet, symbolizing back to business as a hunter. "Do not draw all the weight to you. Unless we find a way to upgrade you with more firepower and more resilience, you can be overwhelmed." Zero turns to look at 2E. "If I retire enough units that I begin to draw their resources, then I think YorHa will start getting the message and reconsider, or be more cautious. Right now, their arrogance will be their own downfall." 2E watched him don the helmet, the crimson shell sealing away the brief glimpse of the warrior beneath, transforming him back into the icon of lethal efficiency. His words were tactically sound, coldly pragmatic. He would be the blade to draw their fire, the overwhelming threat that forced YorHa to reveal its hand and overextend. He was offering himself as both shield and catalyst. She nodded slowly, her mind already shifting gears, the emotional storm channeled into crystalline focus. "A valid strategy," she conceded, her voice all business. "Your combat capabilities are anomalous. They will prioritize you as the primary threat. That gives me operational space." She turned fully to face him, crossing her arms. The movement was familiar, the posture of a soldier briefing a comrade. But the comrade was the variable that had shattered her world, and the mission was treason. "However, your assessment of my limitations is correct. Standard YorHa combat packages are optimized for endurance against machine lifeforms, not for sustained engagements against pure-level executioners, especially in numbers." Her brow furrowed slightly, a new line of calculation. "My systems are modular. Upgrades are possible, but they require components, expertise, and time we may not have. The Resistance's capabilities are insufficient." Her gaze drifted to the distant horizon, where the first stars were beginning to pierce the twilight. "Furthermore, drawing their resources then only works if they have finite resources. The bunker's production capacity is unknown. They may simply escalate with higher frequency deployment of E-type units for other specialized models." She looked back at him, her blue-gray eyes sharp. "Your plan has merit as an opening move. It forces reaction, gathers data, but it is not an endgame." She took a step closer, her tone lowering. "We need more than force. We need information. The location of the moon server, command's operational protocols, the true scope of Project YorHa." A pause. And we need to know what happened to the other E-models who may have questioned their orders. She was thinking like an executioner again, but now the target was the system that created her. The irony was not lost on her. We make you the obvious threat. I become the unseen variable. I still have access to YorHa network channels, limited though they may be. I can monitor communications, track deployment patterns. Her lips pressed into a thin line. And when the time comes to strike at the heart, I know the architecture of the bunker. I know its weaknesses. She finally uncrossed her arms, letting her hands fall to her sides, fingers flexing once. Do not mistake my need for upgrades as weakness, Zero. It is a tactical requirement. And do not assume I will hide behind you. Her eyes gleamed with a fierce, newfound light. You may draw their fire, but I will be the one who cuts the strings. Zero kept his neutral gaze. I know you are capable of hold your own. He speaks. But you said it yourself, you are not prepared for a squadron of your own kind. I, on the other hand, am, and more. So you keep working on the background while I draw their attention. That way you can proceed without worry. 2E's lips tightened, a flicker of something pride, frustration, the ghost of her old, programmed autonomy crossing her features before being schooled back into icy calm. He was right. Tactically, indomitably right. A direct confrontation with the full YorHa execution squad would be a numbers game she was not equipped to win. Not yet. Understood, she said, the word clipped professional. She wasn't agreeing out of deference, but out of cold, hard logic. Your combat efficiency presents a superior diversionary asset. I will utilize the operational space provided. She turned, pacing a few steps on the broken concrete, her mind already mapping the shadows. My access codes are likely already flagged for review following my deviation with you. Overt network intrusion is risky, but there are back channels. Scanner models, particularly those deployed for deep reconnaissance, often develop unorthodox data caches. Their operators turn a blind eye for the sake of mission efficiency. She glanced back at him. Nines is exceptionally talented and curious. The name tasted like ash and guilt, but she forced it out. He was a resource, a vulnerability, and perhaps an ally who didn't yet know he needed to be. I will re-establish contact, she continued, her voice devoid of emotion. Gather intelligence through him. Monitor Command's reaction to your provocations. She stopped pacing and faced Zero fully. You must be visible. Cause disruption. Force them to commit resources. The more they focus on you, the more blind spots they create in their internal security. A faint, grim line that might have been meant as a smile touched her lips for a nanosecond. Make them arrogant. Make them angry. Nothing is more predictable than a military command structure reacting to an overwhelming, insulting threat. She took a final step toward him, closing the distance. Do not hold back. And do not concern yourself with collateral damage to their forces. They are not your comrades. They are components of the system we are targeting. Her blue-gray eyes held his through the crimson visor. Can you do that, Hunter? Can you become the storm that forces them to reveal their foundations? Mission accepted. Zero finished. Cold, calculative, and calm. His eyes filled with determination. He begins to make way out the ruined building. Just try not to drag this camp into it. This will be just you and me. Understood. 2E replied, her voice matching his chill precision. The camp remains outside operational parameters. This remains a deniable action. She watched him turn, his crimson form a stark blade against the grainy twilight. The weight of his commitment settled onto her shoulders not as a burden, but as a tactical load to be distributed and utilized. He would become the flashpoint. She would be the shadow in the blast. Her internal systems were already reconfiguring. Loyalty protocols, once absolute, were now compartmentalized, quarantined like a logic virus. In their place, new directives took shape: observe, analyze, exploit. Pod. She pulsed through her private channel. Pod 042, Unit 2B. Proximity sensors detect no hostile entities within 50 meters. Your vital signs indicate elevated stress markers. Proposal: return to the bunker for diagnostic. Silence that directive. She commanded, the order leaving no room for debate. New priority: establish a secure, localized data nexus. Scrub all logs of my interaction with Subject Zero from the past 72 hours. Fabricate alternative mission logs consistent with standard reconnaissance patterns. There was a pause longer than any she had ever experienced from her pod. Pod 042, acknowledged. Fabrication algorithm initiated. Query. This action constitutes a severe violation of YorHa Protocol 7 Alpha. Rationale? Rationale. Mission parameters have evolved. Compliance is not required. Another pause. Pod 042, understood. Nexus established. Log fabrication in progress. Warning. YorHa Command has initiated a routine priority scan of all surface unit data streams. Probability of detection, 12.3%. Countermeasures? 2E's eyes narrowed. They were already looking. Good. Let them look at the ghost she was about to become. Initiate protocol echo. She sent. Route all of my outgoing data through the abandoned factory's residual machine network before bouncing it to the bunker. Introduce randomized packet loss and corrupted environmental data. Pod 042. Protocol echo activated. Your signal will appear degraded and inconsistent. Query. What is your primary objective? 2E's gaze remained fixed on the spot where Zero had vanished into the gloom. Her hand drifted to the smooth, cool metal of Virtuous Contract's hilt. Primary objective, locate and dismantle the source of the lie. All other priorities are secondary. She turned from the ruined window, her silhouette cutting a clean, decisive line against the darkening rubble. For the first time, her path was clear. She was no longer 2B, the obedient blade. She was 2E, the executioner. And her target was the throat of the gods who had made her. End of scene.